Dragon's Dogma 2 is a game you never expected to release. Over a decade of radio silence, and then this 10th anniversary video celebrating the series comes out with a wrecking ball of an announcement that a new game is on the way. How many people get to experience that catharsis? The feeling that a series you assumed to be long dead was still alive. A chance for newer players to experience something you found so great in the past. A chance for the game to get the recognition it deserved. Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen was a great game, but it was niche in a sense. At least it felt that way to me. In truth, Dark Arisen sold fairly well. The game has sold over 7 million units as of writing this, and that's pretty damn good when comparing it to Capcom staples like Street Fighter, Resident Evil, and Monster Hunter. Still, Dragon's Dogma felt niche to me. It felt like a game that deserved to have more eyes on it, but I also understood why this may not have been the case. I loved my time with it, but many may have found it felt unfinished, empty, lacking in some capacity. I believe that if you invested the time into it, you found most of this to be untrue. Dragon's Dogma feels like a complete package with an engaging story, but it isn't handed to you on a platter. You have to search for it. Learn about the world by actively exploring and seeking lore out, by paying close attention to dialogue and watching every cutscene and completing every side quest. The game expects a lot out of you in order for you to get the most out of it, and that can wall some players off. The bandits at the beginning of the game were a notorious wall that I have heard ruined the initial experience for many players. It wasn't your typical experience. When there's a strong enemy in a starting area, some players may feel inclined to spend as much time as necessary defeating them because these bandits are supposed to be easy in their eyes. And it's only when you explain to these players that you can just run past them that things start to make a bit more sense. Dragon's Dogma wasn't about surpassing every challenge before you right as it's presented. Sometimes you had to bypass enemies or retreat. The world is a dangerous place, and you are warned not to venture too far out, else suffer the consequences. I noticed that whenever I told friends to run past the bandits and just continue playing the game until they could deal with them, their opinion of the game grew exponentially. They started to get it. Dragon's Dogma 2 had the chance to remedy that initial hurdle, to help players experience all there is to see and do within the world while preventing them from getting filtered right at the start. And I am happy to say that it managed to do just that. And if that sounds disappointing to you, like they made the game easier overall, don't worry. What this game offers is an initial experience to help acclimate newer players into the series. And once the world begins to open up more, you still have the opportunity to run into encounters that you just aren't ready for yet. But this is far from right away. You'll be in the main city by that point, getting to know the mechanics of the game better, understanding the rules of the world you are in before venturing out instead of feeling like you are being blindsided. And then you'll still get blindsided by a random minotaur because that's the type of game this is. This series is a love letter to players who enjoy RPGs that try something new, that have unique mechanics and gameplay that you just don't get in most modern experiences. It has missable quests, so there's something new to find on each additional playthrough. It has unique one-off encounters and obscure mechanics that some people feared could brick their game save. Even if that was an overblown reaction, it doesn't seem to do that. It has an endgame so unique, it's unlike anything you have experienced before. I've seen some people feel limited by these decisions and call it bad game design, but this is everything I have personally been looking for. Sometimes the game doesn't need to provide constant validation. Sometimes the design gets to be actively hostile and obscure, and that can make for a better experience overall when you finally overcome something or learn about it for another playthrough. It's not your typical experience, and that's okay because it's willing to try things that actively go against what some players have gotten used to, and this leads to fresh and fulfilling interactions. So today I'd like to offer you a big review of Dragon's Dogma 2, from the perspective of someone who has beaten the game fully twice and experienced most of, if not all, there is to see. Unlocked every achievement, visited virtually every location, and fought every type of monster. I put a ton of time into this game and it never felt like a chore because this is my dream experience. This is your major spoiler warning. I mean, seriously major. I won't just be talking about the initial start of the game or surface level mechanics. We're going all in. The story, the side quests, the lands to explore, and the endgame. All spoilers are probably going to be covered and analyzed. Dragon's Dogma is a game you should go into blind to experience fully, but if you want to know all about it, this is the place for you. If not, I recommend beating it at least once before continuing. If you enjoy this content, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing, as it helps me continue to make these videos for you all. With that out of the way, I'm Super Rad, and this is the big Dragon's Dogma 2 review. I wouldn't be doing my due diligence at this point if I didn't start things off by discussing the elephants in the room. Those being performance issues, the single save file, and the microtransactions. So let's discuss each of these in order. I am not a technical reviewer. You are not going to get content from me that can properly analyze the performance of a game, explain to you why it is the way it is, and give you all of the information surrounding things like performance. That being said, there has been plenty of talk and complaints online surrounding this topic, so I feel it's justified to bring up and warn about to some degree. Let me start by saying this. I have watched friends play the game on low-end PCs and on PS5s. From an anecdotal perspective, the game seems to run fine. I have seen no major issues in my time watching these individuals. I am of the mind that if you play the game on PS5 or adjust your settings on PC, you're going to have a fine experience and the performance isn't going to be a factor you focus on. There will be dips, sure, but nothing game ruining. It's also important to note that while this is no excuse for any performance issues on release, it is something the developers are in the process of remedying. So if you are of the mind that the current state of performance is too much of an issue for you, all I can do is recommend holding off on your purchase until they're fixed. Maybe while waiting for a sale on top of that. This is a full-priced game, and some don't feel that it is justifiable to experience these performance issues for something being sold at that price, if at all, and I think there's validity in that. Now that being said, my personal experience is that these issues are overblown at best. This is just me theorizing and not a fact, but it seems as if some players expect to be able to run games at max settings with no tweaking, seeing it as a game-breaking performance issue when they have to play something on medium instead of ultra. I found a setup that allowed me to run at a steady 60 FPS most of the time on a 4K monitor, and I imagine this would only be easier for people playing at 2K or 1080p. If you are on PC, I recommend you at least give it a shot. You can always refund it after all. As far as the save file thing, there is valid criticism here that for some reason the game didn't offer a new game option. That I understand. I don't think it's valid to criticize the lack of multiple save files, however. For context, the original Dragon's Dogma also had a single save file. This is by design due to the mechanics of the game, specifically the pawn system and the consequences of your actions. It's meant to disincentivize players from save scumming. I don't personally judge someone for save scumming, mind you, but it's a deliberate design choice to help put you in the mindset where you need to remember that every action has consequences. Everything matters. If you want multiple save files with multiple characters and pawns, well, tough. That's not the type of game we're playing here. Dragon's Dogma 2 isn't the type of game where you can make 3 Arisen and then run through the game using all of your pawns and reaping the rewards for doing so. It's a game that gives you one save file and you are expected to use the online components to hire other players' pawns, engaging in the community aspect of this unique mechanic. I understand not liking this decision, but if that's where you're at, then that's one you gotta suck up or just pass on because it's so crucial to the overall design of the game. And we'd lose the charm of the systems in place if it was different. We'll come to understand why that is as we explore the mechanics later on. What I cannot excuse is the lack of an option to wipe the save and start a new game. Full disclosure, as of writing this, it has been implemented, but for some reason there was no new game option when playing through the sequel, and there wasn't any reason for this considering the first game had this option from the get-go and also had the single save file, so like why? What were we doing? What were we thinking there? The issue with the largest outcry by far has had to be the microtransactions. Before I go further, let's make it perfectly clear where I stand on the topic. I will never be a fan of MTX, and what I discuss moving forward will not be in defense of MTX. If you asked me if I would have preferred for Dragon's Dogma 2 to have purchasable items or not, my answer would emphatically be no. Yet at the same time, I can say that the reactions to their inclusions were overblown. Not overblown in the sense that people overstated their dislike, but overblown in how much misinformation and exaggeration there was surrounding the conversation. I think the most constructive way to critique something like MTX is to voice that it's not a welcome aspect of gaming in general. At its most innocent level, the inclusion feels like a lazy way to earn some extra income off of a game's release by adding in the ability to buy something you probably aren't going to need anyway. At its worst, it's a predatory tactic that preys on gambling addiction using designs like loot boxes in an attempt to pressure players into spending more money in unethical ways. So when I tell you that Dragon's Dogma 2 has microtransactions, but they are so benign that they are not something I personally see worth purchasing, I am not defending the inclusion. I am informing you that these items are all readily available in the game and that the game was not designed in any way to incentivize their purchase. And if you see this inclusion as a reason to not purchase the game anyway, then that is completely valid. I even understand where you're coming from. You are not incorrect to feel the way that you do, but it doesn't change the fact that for those who do not, this wouldn't affect their gameplay experience in any way. And I think it's just as valid to suggest people play the game and simply not buy the microtransactions in this specific instance. Loot boxes are different, gambling's different. I don't think you should support that at all. Like, don't even buy the game at that point. What muddies the waters is the misinformation, outright lies, and exaggerations I have seen online. Like people claiming you have to pay to edit your character or you have to pay to start a new game. You know, things completely at odds with the actual experience. There was no new game purchase, and the character editor items can be purchased using rift crystals in-game. These rift crystals are found in the overworld or through making use of the main social mechanic of the game, the pawn system, as that's the intended way of earning them. This was such an issue for people that a recent patch even added the ability to purchase up to 99 of these character editing items, up from the 2 that were available per new game initially. You could buy 2 and then an additional 2 in New Game Plus if you wanted. And I mean, you can criticize not having infinite access to a character creator if you want. And I saw some people trying to do that, but that is a completely different criticism to the microtransaction issue. Like you're moving the goalposts at that point and it's completely unnecessary. I'm sorry you couldn't make your character or change your character 20 times in a playthrough. That really sucks for you. I saw people call the purchases predatory because the items are effectively useless and new players wouldn't know better, despite the item page telling you that all of these items are obtainable in-game, aside from 2 purchases because they were part of the deluxe edition. I'm not even disagreeing that MTX can be inherently predatory, but the evidence for this being the case here is thin at best. These types of logical leaps started to lead to conspiratorial discussions where people claimed that the developers hid the transactions from reviewers when, at least for me and several others, that wasn't the case since they provided a link to a list of exactly what would be on sale at that time, which was largely deemed so useless that it wasn't worth mentioning. And if that's an issue to you, That's on me. That's my bad. I truly didn't think it was something that would need to be discussed and brought up. I'm sure a big factor of that is due to me being so used to the practice in games and it also not being a deal breaker for me on whether or not I'm going to buy something. Usually I draw the line at gambling specifically, loot boxes and the like. This was actually my first time ever seeing a developer show me something like purchasable content ahead of time. So if anything, they seem to be doing their due diligence. Still sucks, but there's no conspiracy. You see what I mean? Some of these criticisms and points seem to not be malicious, but come from a general sense of ignorance. A lack of understanding because they didn't play the game or didn't look into the things they are complaining about. Take this tweet here. Very sobering hearing Stephanie Sterling's coverage of DD2's awful microtransactions. So many of the excuses I heard all week melting away after hearing that fast travel costs half of an entire in-game house's worth of in-game currency. Show me someone claiming to love their 20th backtrack through the same long path with the exact same enemy placement and I'll show you a fucking liar. Is it true that a fairy stone, the currency used to fast travel to port crystals, is 10,000 gold, while the first home you can buy is 20,000 gold? Yes, it is. But this leaves out the fact that this house is one of the cheapest purchases in the game because of its insane economy, or that you can't even buy fairy stones on the store page. You can buy one single port crystal, which is an item you place down to create a fast travel point, but the items you actually need to perform the traveling are exclusively found in game. You'll find plenty on your travels, and you'll also have the funds to buy plenty whenever you want. Again, these purchases suck, but are so useless, they are not affecting the game. So when you see people with takes like they limited fast travel to push MTX, it just shows that they have no idea what they are talking about and look foolish when compared to people complaining about more pertinent issues with MTX. You have creators trying to justify their misinformed point by saying people don't like to backtrack 20 times through an area when that never happens in the game. I hate being that person, but it's embarrassing. It is embarrassing to see these people try to dunk on something arguably worth criticizing using incorrect and ignorant evidence showing their lack of experience with the game or research into the subject. I'm not even saying they need to play the game. Just look into what you were talking about beforehand. And when somebody calls you out on it, just like own up to that. We can all dislike microtransactions, but this aspect of Dragon's Dogma was designed to be isolated from the rest of it. The game is detached from these purchases, which is a good thing for the consumer because they are not losing anything from not buying them. Something the store page again tells you explicitly. Purchasing a singular port crystal doesn't even benefit you in comparison to ox cart travel, since the majority of major locations that you will be visiting the most often can be reached cheaply via this mechanic. I've seen people complain a pawn costs as much as a AAA game to hire, not understanding that use of higher level pawns is disincentivized through the cost of rift crystals and the EXP debuff you take when someone in your party is a higher level than you. People legitimately think this mechanic, which debuted in the first game, once again where you earn the crystals yourself, is only to push the purchase of microtransactions, not because it's just the most unique and engaging mechanic in the game. That developers took great pains in balancing it for players so they aren't overpowered without an outrageous amount of rift crystals in their possession, an amount that you couldn't even accrue off of microtransactions because they are one-time purchases. People are complaining about made-up scenarios that don't and almost can't actually happen in the game. We have people complaining that you need to spend $2 anytime you want to re-edit your character, that the secret spoiler mechanic is in the game to sell wake stones, even though you can only buy 5, which is nowhere near enough to solve the problem. It's pathetic. People are riled up not just because of microtransactions at their core, but because of human psychology. When people are taught things that are later proven to be untrue, they often double down, looking for ways to justify their anger that often lead to further misinformation. It was one of the most frustrating things to watch on a game launch because I was stuck watching an incensed group of individuals make complete asses out of themselves over a topic that is actually worth discussing and delving into because, again, microtransactions suck ass. The moral of the story is that two things can be true at once. Microtransactions are something we consider a blight on games in the market, but this instance of them has no effect on the game. If you want to fight the spread of microtransactions in gaming, you need to address the entire industry instead of condemning one game or even one company. But if you are watching this video looking for an opinion on whether or not the game is worth it with the inclusion of these purchasable items, then my answer is yes. And we can finally move on to the actual game.
Go now, lost soul. Learn all you can of this world you must protect.
If you've never played Dragon's Dogma before, I have no idea why you're watching this spoiler-filled video, but I'll use this opportunity to give a brief rundown on what the game is and what to expect. Both Dragon's Dogma 1 and 2 are open-world high fantasy action RPGs in which the main character, the Arisen, is tasked with killing the dragon, known as Gregory in the first game and No Name in the sequel. The player character is known as the Arisen due to an event where the dragon rips the heart out of the character's chest and consumes it, reviving you in the process. While the main goal of the Arisen is to kill the dragon, there are often other important political aspects of the game that can both aid or get in their way. In the first game, there's a cult that worships the dragon and often comes into direct conflict with your character. Even after killing the dragon, the Duke of the Land turns against you for various storyline-related reasons. In the sequel, it is dictated that the Arisen is to be sovereign of the land of Vermund. If there is ever an active Arisen, they are to be in charge, and this comes into conflict with the current Queen Regent, who wishes to stay in power in order to help her son ascend to the throne. These aspects of the story are more prevalent than the actual task of killing the dragon, especially when taking part in side content. Dragon's Dogma is a game about side content more than anything else. If you wanted to, you could complete either game within the span of a few hours. No crazy speedrun tactics required. It's the side quests and exploration that help add to the overall playtime and enrich the experience. To assist the Arisen, he is given command over one of the game's most unique features, the pawn system. Pawns are individuals that can travel between worlds using rift crystals, but whether or not this traveling means the first and second games are connected via the rift is still up in the air. The Arisen gets to make their own pawn to always be by their side, but the interesting part takes place when you look to hire a full party of additional pawns. Dragon's Dogma is a social game. It doesn't have co-op, but instead allows you to hire the pawns of other Arisen playing at the same time. In my opinion, it's one of the best features in the game. By accessing a Rift Crystal, a player can search the servers for other players' pawns. These pawns can be any of the 4 base vocations or 2 of the advanced vocations. But what makes them really special is that they learn based on their experiences with both their personal Arisen and the Arisen of other worlds. Let's say that I complete a side quest that none of the pawns in my party have ever completed before. All of those pawns will now have knowledge of the quest from thereafter. If I were to dismiss one of the hireable pawns and send them back to their owner, when they update their playthrough and continue playing, their pawn will now offer knowledge on how to complete the quest. This is the same for various other aspects of the game. Pawns can point out chests, dungeons, quest locations, and even earn knowledge on how to deal with specific creatures. If a goblin ill likes fire, the pawn can learn that and inform you of it during the next encounter, or utilize it themselves. In this way, pawns collectively grow as long as they are being used, and due to the nature of the system, they will get used by other players and slowly begin to gain knowledge, even when you are not personally playing. Higher level pawns than your Arisen will cost Rift Crystals, with the currency raising as the difference in power grows greater. It's a means of balancing the experience. Even if you wanted to use a strong pawn to blast through the game, you probably aren't going to be able to right away, even with the microtransactions. In this way, the pawn system cannot be abused for an easier experience on a first playthrough, except through a single means. Players that are friends with another on Steam, as an example, can hire their friend's pawn for free regardless of level. In the previous game, the way to try and dissuade players from using this method was to add in a system where you receive less experience the more powerful the pawn is, and more experience when using weaker or no pawns entirely. The option is there for you, but you won't be power leveling by using it. How many games can you think of that have a similar system? In a way, it's revolutionary because it allows you to go into a game blind, but also offers you in-game mechanics to figure certain things out if you are stuck during a quest or against a specific boss. If you don't know where to go, try hiring a pawn and having them guide you to the location. Usually it's just enough of a push to get you back on track without spoiling the entire experience. And you may learn something along the way that the pawn didn't know. I've had pawns guide me on a quest, but because I finished it by different means, the pawn commented on this and could inform their Arisen of the fact on future playthroughs. It's the best. An engaging and rewarding experience. And when you dismiss these pawns, you can send them back with a singular gift of your choosing, something the game understands is such a cool idea that they purposefully allow you to abuse it. I've had players send me port crystals, wake stones, and some one-of-a-kind items from their playthrough. There's an arrow you can find that can instantly kill any enemy, even the final boss. It's a one-use thing, but it can instantly kill anything. There was one of these in the original game, and the sequel has 2 for you to find. Think about how valuable that type of item is. In most games, even in MMOs, something like that would be considered market prohibited and untradeable. But Dragon's Dogma says don't even worry about it, and allows you to trade it anyway. I've received one instance of every insane reward item in the game by this point because people either don't care or do not realize the worth of these items, and that's the beauty of the game. It's a learning experience that you get to actively share with other players in-game without ever actually seeing them. The biggest issue with pawns surrounds their AI and dialogue.
That was certainly worthwhile.
A laudable result. Just what I would expect of the Arisen.
It is vital that we rest and regain our strength before moving on.
If you are someone that dislikes having party members constantly pointing out things to you, often repeated lines, I have bad news. While this is considered somewhat charming within the circle of the dedicated community, it is something that could easily be considered off-putting to the uninitiated. While traveling, pawns will constantly be talking and commenting on the situation, often offering advice and explaining something they heard in a different world, and it can be grating.
There's no need to make camp here. We've energy enough to press on for a while yet.
Let us return once we've grown tired from our labors.
Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be a way to stop this either outside of a setting that allows you to set the volume of pawn voices and a specialization that can be equipped to your pawn later on. The AI, while commendable in many aspects, is often a frustrating factor in various situations. Pawns can be prone to falling off of cliffs or into deep bodies of water, and this can permanently kill and remove them from the party until you reach another riftstone to rehire them. I think game knowledge is a huge factor here, though. The more you understand about the game, the more you realize that the AI isn't going to be a headache. Take traversing areas. From time to time, pawns may end up stuck on a cliff's edge after you have climbed down, and while that may sound frustrating, you do have commands to remedy this. By telling your pawns to stick close to you, if far enough away, they can instantly teleport back to your current location. You get 4 of these commands to be active at any time. You can tell pawns to get close to you like I mentioned, but you could also tell pawns to go, which gives them more leverage to expand outwards during battle. Go can even be used as confirmation when a pawn asks you if you want them to show you an area they found in a different world. You can tell them to wait and to help you in dire situations. For all intents and purposes, a player familiar with the mechanics is not going to have problems with the AI in the game because you have enough control over it to have a smooth experience. And while I can understand some players not wanting to have to fuss over their party in that sense, this is the unfortunate reality of a game that gives you so much freedom in both the world and your party. Pawns have a mind of their own. It's not like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth where the party sticks beside you at all times and doesn't attempt to interact with anything until you're in combat. Pawns can actively seek out and do their own thing, pick up loot, open chests, etc. The AI isn't bad in this game, there's just so much to it, you have to be willing to rein it in when necessary. In order to improve on pawns and make them more versatile, new specializations have been added to the game. By completing certain objectives or becoming friends with various NPCs, those characters will sometimes approach you and provide you with an item that can bestow a specialization onto your pawn. Pawns can only have one specialization at a time, and you can overwrite it with something else if you wish. They can get specializations to perform inventory management for the party, to use curatives, or to mark gatherable locations on your map. They can even learn the Elvish language, allowing them to translate for you and they can even buy items from your inventory. If you really can't stand how much a pawn talks, there's even the Aphanite specialization that removes their ability to make observations for the most part. It helps add more purpose to the pawns outside of combat and quests, giving them more utility when interacting with the world around them. Additionally, pawn quests have been introduced to help players incentivize others to hire their companion. These quests can be a variety of things, but the main ones you'll be able to assign are the killing of monsters you've run into within the game so far. Killing enough of them provides your pawn with a badge, showcasing their knowledge of a specific creature when being searched for in the Rift. Pawn quests are another means of offering items to other players as a reward for their own actions rather than the actions of their pawn. You could offer up to 10,000 gold at a time if someone is willing to kill an ogre for you. Or maybe you want to offer a rare item instead because you really need the Sphinx badge and it's harder to get since there's only one in the game. It helps make sure your pawn is getting the experience you want them to receive while adding to the social dynamic. I'll often see people decry the lack of co-op in the game, claiming it to be a missed opportunity, but I don't see it that way. Itsuno wanted to have a specific mechanic that allowed you to share your experiences with other players via the pawn system, and to tack a co-op mode on top of that would devalue this addition. When people talk about video games being art, this is what they mean. When a developer or designer creates these mechanics to deliver a unique experience, it's an odd criticism to point out something is missing when they didn't want to include it from the get-go, you know what I mean? I understand thinking co-op would be a fun experience, but I think you get more out of a product when you look at what the developer wanted to deliver to you and experience it with the mindset of attempting to understand the product from their point of view. Did they deliver on what they intended? Did this mechanic add to the overall product or detract from it, etc.? In this case, I believe there has never been anything like the pawn system before, and you'd be doing yourself a disservice to not at least go into the game with an open mind, trying it out for yourself. Like, yeah, co-op could be cool. Like, don't get me wrong, I think co-op could be cool. I'm sure Dragon's Dogma Online was sick as hell, but like, we don't need it here. You know what I mean? It's just, you're asking for another feature that is cool, but just isn't necessary. I love the pawn system. I think it's one of the shiny examples of what makes the game so special, and one of the things I love describing to players who want to get into the game for the first time. If you sit me down and can talk my ear off about some unique mechanic in some niche game, I am almost always going to be incredibly interested from the get-go. It's going to get me to try the game out for myself because it's these unique experiences that allow certain games to stand out from the rest. It's one of the things that lets you know this game was a passion project because Itsuno was willing to do something obtuse and different while creating a game for a company as big as Capcom. I like to think of it like this. A lot of people often accuse my enjoyment of the old school Monster Hunter games as being something influenced by nostalgia. While I could spend hours discussing this point and its lack of validity, I will just mention that the obtuseness, mechanical friction, and player antagonistic design within the older games is something I found highly appealing, and with their loss in future games, I felt there was also a loss of a certain charm that made the game so great. Dragon's Dogma 2 has that charm because it allows itself to keep those mechanics. It allows itself to create friction between it and the player, and through that an obstacle for the player to overcome. It gives the game character and makes it stand out from the rest while being a memorable experience. In a way, much of what I miss from older Monster Hunter games I still get in Dragon's Dogma. It's not that these designs have become archaic, it's that the focus of many games has shifted to something that can more easily appeal to a wider audience. And while I accept that that is the way things are, and that this is the way things are probably gonna stay for a series like Monster Hunter, I can feel content knowing there are some games willing to still push the player experience in unconventional directions. That's why this game is special. I do want to offer a word of warning. While it is not necessary to play the first game to understand the basics of the sequel, the amount of context you lose for not doing so is almost unfathomable to me. We'll explore that more as we discuss aspects of the story, but there is so much exploration into the lore and world of the first game that helps you better understand what is happening in the sequel. I do feel like there are sections of the second game that might come off as confusing to people who have not at least experienced the base game storyline of the first entry. I highly recommend working through the first game before playing this one, but if that's not for you, I'm gonna show my own long-form retrospective of Dark Arisen. Yay! Where I go over all of the game's features, mechanics, and storyline in excruciating detail. Hope that helps. In my initial review, I discussed the differences between the openings when playing the first game and its sequel, namely that the first game wants to introduce you to the big bad right away while setting up an air of mystery, considering you start the game as Sivan rather than as your own Arisen. It provides the questions of who you are and what this dragon is before immediately proceeding to answer at least one of those after you've made your character and your home village gets attacked by Grigori, causing you to become the Arisen in the process. It's a good sequence of events and offers enough of a starting narrative to give you an idea of where things are going to go while unlocking more about the lore and storyline through your playthrough in a way that feels cohesive. Throughout the entirety of my playthrough in Dark Arisen, I feel I am on a path to understanding what is happening, building context after each event that helps to shed light on mysteries I had perceived previously. This is not as much the case in the sequel, and this sort of lack of cohesion surprised me more than anything else. The biggest issue occurs when we start the game as the Arisen and slowly work our way backwards, finding out how losing our heart came to be. You wake up in a jail, you escape that jail, and you spend the first hour or so of the game learning that the dragon appeared, attacked a village, and you died in the process, being revived as the Arisen when the dragon ate your heart. For a player accustomed to the previous game, that's fine. We understand what an Arisen is, their duty. Everything gets explained early on, and it's the focus. That doesn't feel like the case here. I imagine a new player may find these sequences of events to be nonsensical and confusing. They see a clip from the past about how they have become Arisen, they barely understand what that means, and then dealing with the dragon sort of takes a back seat entirely because there's this whole political aspect of the game that we end up focusing on. You get the basics, I guess. You learn you can command pawns and that you are destined to kill the dragon, but really that's all. Future important information feels as though it builds off of the previous game's world knowledge rather than the current one. It's like a refresher for veteran players before throwing you into some deep lore near the end. Just for clarity's sake, this dragon is nameless. I theorized for a long time that because this world was an alternate universe, this was an alternate version of Grigori, and while they look and sound the same, the name is purposefully left out throughout the entirety of the playthrough, leading me to believe that they either didn't want to confirm that this is Grigori yet, or they simply removed the name to avoid confusion as this is another different dragon. The story of Dragon's Dogma was always something that felt like it was there for the sake of it, until the end of the game, where you are flashbanged with incredible lore that builds the world for you in all of 20 minutes. The story of Dragon's Dogma is actually crazy, and you can speed through the game to learn about it quickly if you want. It's similar here, except I found as though a lot was left out. For example, did you know pawns can gain a will of their own and start to look like they're Arisen over time? There's even a pawn who becomes fully human in the original game. The concept of servitude to rebirth plays a big factor within the endgame of Dragon's Dogma 1. In 2, within the final cutscene of the final event of the game's true ending, you get one line about the pawn's will and no exploration into the concept after that because the game's over. It's things like that. Side quests in the previous game weren't just interesting mechanically, a lot of them could explain some of the lore surrounding the world, and it feels like we get that in the second game, just less so, with crucial bits left out to make room for some arguably insane revelations later on. So that's a big issue I want you to be aware of. These two games are companion pieces to one another. You can have an enjoyable, albeit confusing playthrough with the second game, but you'll have a more fantastic experience by playing both in order. And for that reason, as I come back to it, I find the opening segments in the sequel weaker. You take part in a tutorial segment that feels tacked on, it teaches you all of 2 important mechanics before sending you off into the world, you're thrust into a pseudo boss battle to sort of get your bearings with the game's mechanics so far, and the next thing you know, you're landing in Vermund to start your journey proper. Dragon's Dogma 1 took place entirely within the region known as Granzis. However, while the existence of Granzis and the capital of Grand Soren seem to be used as a bit of an Easter egg late into the game, it doesn't exist properly within this alternate universe. Instead, we are given a larger map to explore with 3 major regions: Vermund, Battahl, and the Volcanic Island, the latter being more of a stop to the final confrontation more than anything else. What makes Dragon's Dogma 2 stronger than the original in this situation is that we received a lot of lip service about neighboring lands in the original game, but now we get a chance to explore the concept rather than solely hear about it. a more show-don't-tell attitude, leading to a more liberating experience. Your time in Vermund is going to look completely different than your time in Battahl, visually anyway. The combat is going to be fairly similar throughout, with little to no enemy variety. The game is completely seamless through the grand majority of your playthrough. You could travel from one end of the map to the other, passing through major cities along the way, and you wouldn't be met with a single loading screen. While the technical limitations are there, you can see virtually everything that your eyes allow you to. Monsters far in the distance, towns to explore, landmarks to visit, etc. The lands of Dragon's Dogma 2 are both larger and denser than the original, looking to provide more incentive to get you out there and find what is to be found. You could be making your way through a forest found on the side of a desert, and the next thing you know, you're walking through a cave to fight a unique boss that only spawns in that one location. Then you find out that you were steps away from another dungeon-like area that holds another powerful boss which you may not be prepared for yet. There's experiences like that all over the world map because the game wants to reward you for going out of your way. Not in equipment, mind you, but in other ways, like with experiences or one-of-a-kind items. That is probably where the game's exploration is at its weakest. The majority of gear you will find on your journey will be purchased through merchant NPCs found within the various towns. If your main goal of exploring is finding better gear, then you are going to be disappointed. That doesn't mean exploration is worthless though. In fact, it still has plenty of rewards. Some incredibly rare and powerful items are out there for you to find. But for equipment specifically, that concept doesn't open much until the endgame. It's there though. There are some unique pieces of gear to find if you are willing to go search for them. They just won't wow you that much. You can start the game, and aside from maybe one gate during the pseudo-tutorial section, you can begin walking from one end of the map to the next. The best part is, you may never think that possible. Battahl feels as though it is locked off via story progression, but there are two separate side paths that allow you to bypass this requirement to get there early on. Then, if you want to go to the Volcanic region, where you would unlock Magic Archer and Warfare vocations, you can traverse this huge Mines of Moria Lord of the Rings ass area that is meant to challenge your desire to make it through. These shortcuts are a bit difficult to get through early on in your first playthrough, but the Volcanic region especially so. The game is actively telling you to turn back, else get your ass beat, and it makes it all the more satisfying to get through there anyway, as if defiant of what the game expects of you. That's one of the major appeals of the game, fighting against its antagonistic design. To balance this, we need to talk about the game's fast travel system. Let's say you made it all the way to the Volcanic region at the start of the game. How do you get back? The closest area that has an ox cart would be Battahl, I believe, and that's at least half the map away. So you are stranded because the game does not have a conventional fast travel system. To be better prepared, the game expects you to bring items known as port crystals along your journey. Port crystals are a rare item within the world of Dragon's Dogma. When starting your game, there will be two dedicated port crystals that can be found, one in the capital of Vermund and the other within a small fishing village to the southwest. All others must be found by the player, and once found can be carried by the player and placed virtually anywhere on the map that has access to the sky. Dragon's Dogma has an active fast travel system in this mechanic. You not only need to make it to an area to unlock the ability to travel there, you need to place a crystal there as well. Then, once placed, you must use consumable items known as fairy stones to utilize the mechanic. It's absurd in the best way. The game wants you to explore, and to incentivize this, offers you the ability to customize your own fast travel experience. Sure, the crystals are rare, but when you do find them, and when you use them correctly, you can cut out huge swaths of travel throughout your playthrough. And to help alleviate some of this travel, major areas that you will spend the most time in are all connected via an ox cart transportation service. You could travel from Vermund to the checkpoint rest town, and from the town to Battahl. You can skip the trip, and the only thing preventing you from reaching your destination is the possibility of your cart being raided and destroyed. You can fight off the raid, but sometimes it's out of your hands. Next thing you know, you are stranded in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night, being chased by Cyclops and skeleton mages. It's awesome. To me anyway. I'm sure this sort of design is the friction that is causing a lot of players not used to it to get frustrated, but to me, that's what makes the adventure an adventure. No form of travel outside of port crystals is truly safe, so you need to understand that the game's world is out to get you, and you need to prepare for the journey ahead of time. It's like Monster Hunter. You don't go hunt a Rathalos without the right tools and items. Similarly, you don't travel through Vermund without the proper party, equipment, and potions. maybe a camping kit and food to give you stat bonuses. The game's exploration becomes significantly easier and less hostile the more you learn throughout the game. Yeah, you can go camping. Say you got stranded like in the previous example. Find a campsite, pray you brought a kit, and set it up. Then you can pass time until morning when it's safer to travel. But be careful because you can still get raided even here. How evil is that? Do you see what I was talking about with the idea that certain individuals are ignorant and creating conspiracy theories in regards to the game's MTX practices? The game's travel system isn't set up the way it is because they want you to buy a single port crystal that isn't going to help you in the long run. They set it up the way it is because it's engaging, because it's challenging, and because that challenge is lessened the more you learn and the more you find/progress. You don't get that from many games. Think Outward if you've ever played that. The world is hostile and you have to make it your own, and eventually you're sailing across the map because you know what you're doing. Criticism where it's due, I have two major gripes with traveling through the overworld. One significant issue I experience involves New Game Plus. In the first entry, the port crystals you placed would remain where they were from the previous playthrough, meaning you have the ability to quickly speed through to different areas right from the get-go. This was great for a variety of reasons. There's an early quest where you need to go find a villager in a forest and meet a woman living in a tree in the process. It's a long journey and there's a shortcut that takes you back to the starting city right away. The reason you can't reach this shortcut from the other end is because it's on a cliffside. So if you place a port crystal on the cliff, you can now bypass that long journey for future playthroughs whenever you want. Little things like that, which added to making the game so special, have unfortunately been removed in the sequel. Additionally, I may be misremembering, but future playthroughs allowed you to reacquire the port crystals you found in the past, meaning you had extra crystals to work with, allowing for additional fast travel locations to be made, further adding to your overall exploration progress per playthrough, up to a maximum of something like 10 total. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore. Anytime I found a port crystal I had acquired previously in my new playthrough, it ended up being a forgery. Now, that isn't the end of the world. I don't know how many unique crystals there are to find, but there's enough to be comfortable. Plus, players could send your pawn back with a crystal if they are feeling especially generous. I know I personally will never have to worry about collecting anymore because I know where I'm placing them and what my route is moving forward. But the fact that I have to place them again every time I do a new playthrough, unlike the first game, is a bit grating. I love exploring in the game, but once I've explored everything, why am I stuck still traversing through the areas where I one-shot every single enemy because there's no scaling based off of level and no hard mode? And that's the other major issue I have with the exploration in the sequel. The sheer density of enemies can be exhausting, especially for newer or inexperienced players. I understand the worlds we explore in Dragon's Dogma are meant to be dangerous, but we have goblins at the foot of the entrance to some major cities and settlements, and it can feel like you are playing Dynasty Warriors on your way to your next destination. Not to mention how often you run into some powerful enemies early on at the beginning of the playthrough. The entire idea of Granzis in the original game was that the true punishment began when you went off of the beaten path. Sure, you had harpies here, goblins there, but you weren't going to run into a chimera very often if you stayed on the main trail. Now it feels like every couple of steps I am running into huge bands of goblins, wolves, cyclops, a minotaur, and several chimeras, sometimes all at once. And you know, from the perspective of someone that can handle it, I can look at that and say, cool, free experience. But for anyone starting out, I could only see this as being an exhausting deterrent that makes them not wish to go out and explore the world around them. Some discretion would have been great here. It doesn't help that Dragon's Dogma 2 can often feel like it is lacking in monster variety in comparison to its predecessor. It's not a major discrepancy, but the density of the enemies makes it overly apparent. It makes it all the sweeter when you find a unique enemy for sure, but even I was tired of fighting goblins in Battahl near the end of my first playthrough. Now that I'm saying this, I do think Dragon's Dogma 2 is a fantastic experience, one of my favorite games of the year, but that doesn't mean it's without issues. Where it's stronger than the original in some aspects, it's weaker in others. It feels like an upgrade overall, but there is plenty missing that left me scratching my head. Vocations are a clear example, as they can tend to feel more limited with how they are mechanically designed in comparison to the first game. Thief and Archer have been split up from the previous Strider Vocation, meaning we lose Assassin in the process. Mystic Knight has been replaced with Mystic Spearhand, and we have two new unique vocations on top of that. There was a certain appeal to the system in place in the first game. Every base vocation had a complementary advanced vocation and a hybrid based off of those other bases. It felt interwoven in a way that we don't get here. I remember being told that the split from Thief to Archer was to give each vocation/weapon their own identity, but was there a lack of identity before? Strider was the dagger and bow class. I don't need a pure bow or pure dagger class because they offered me assassin and ranger in the original game, and those had their own personalities for different reasons. It feels to me that, due to how the skill system works now, it was a necessity to break up Strider because otherwise you would have too many skills to choose from that you couldn't actively utilize at one time. In the previous game, the amount of skills you had available to you were based on your vocation's weapons. A fighter could have 6 skills equipped because he had 3 for his sword and 3 for his shield. Meanwhile, a warrior would just have 3 at one time, and a mage had 6 spells to choose from because they're special, because they're magic. So it's been balanced in a way where many classes have lost skill slots while warrior has earned an extra one. To help alleviate this issue, certain abilities that may have been skills in the past are now core abilities. Anodyne, the healing spell, is the perfect example of this, as it has taken over the heavy attack option for mages, meaning they essentially have 5 skills at a time instead of 6 now. And because some vocations no longer exist, the identity of those classes via skills needed to be put somewhere or thrown into the void. Meaning it's easier to split up Archer and Thief since they'll have so much to work with now, and you only get to have 4 skills active at a time. That's what's frustrating here. It feels like we took a step forward in terms of balance and the appeal of combat as a whole. Battles feel incredible, and the scale of them only becomes accentuated the larger the creature you fight, but your Arisen feels overall more limited due to the changes in place. As a whole, combat still manages to feel near revolutionary in comparison to other games on the market. That's going to upset or confuse some people watching, so just hold on a second. Dragon's Dogma doesn't have combos like Devil May Cry or the sort of combat typical to the Souls series. For all intents and purposes, it's a hack and slash on a surface level. Where the combat truly begins to shine is with everything else. Creatures can react to the environment, they can be pinned to walls, bounce into walls, and end up unconscious. They can form bridges, break bridges, carry you to far-off locations, ambush you, and more. Every encounter has the opportunity to feel unique. The issue is that there's so many encounters that you'll start to see repetition no matter how unique a developer tries to make something. But when you are fighting a Cyclops and scaling its body to reach its eye so you can attack its weak point, that's the sort of experience that doesn't begin to feel old nearly as much as when you are fighting goblins. Having an ogre grab you and toss you around before you get launched into the air. Having a griffin fly you across the map to its nest, potentially bringing you to a new area you haven't explored before. Having minotaurs completely blindside you by hiding until you're close enough to strike. Drakes show up to absolutely ruin you, but then you manage to pull through and feel incredible because of it. Other combat systems are engaging for different reasons, but where there is simplicity in Dragon's Dogma's skills, there's complexity in everything else. Sometimes I'll just be a Beyblade and melting enemies for hours on end. Other times I'll be using my Mystic Spear hand ability to shield my party or even to cross gaps that normally wouldn't be possible. The opportunities for depth are there despite the initial impression I see some people have succumbed to. Combat is inherently limited from a base sense, and the changes to vocations sort of add on to that concept in the worst way, giving you gameplay that is arguably less varied than the previous games simply because you don't have as many options as you did before. If on the surface, Dragon's Dogma looks simplistic and limited, the sequel is even worse in this sense, and it's all the more apparent even when we know that it's not the full picture. Sure, the experience of the monsters and the environment adds huge value to the combat, but it's like a big red beacon has appeared from the sky to further drill into your head that the skills and abilities available to you at one time are pretty simplistic and lackluster. Does that mean vocations are lacking in their charm? Of course not. There's still plenty to enjoy about each vocation, except Trickster, and there's enough about each of them to set them apart from the other options. Mystic Spear Hand is a class about controlling the field by staggering groups of enemies and throwing them off cliffs with telekinesis. Fighter is both a tank and a damage dealer when it needs to be. Archer is a pure damage ranged class, ironically, because it sucks. And Magic Archer gets to use one-shot Oppenheimers that are guaranteed kills on pretty much any enemy. What we love about Dragon's Dogma combat is there. It's just disappointing that it feels like a downgrade in ways that you would imagine are impossible considering we've been waiting 12 years for this to release. The main issue I have with some of these decisions is that they aren't an upgrade. They're either a downgrade or it feels like we're going sideways instead of going forward. Dragon's Dogma 2 does some new things and improves on the game in many aspects, but for something I've been waiting so long to have released, I feel a need to be more critical when it comes to my expectations. I believe Dragon's Dogma can shine when it's more of the same, just better. I don't need a lot of new things there if everything has been improved on, but a lot of what has changed feels like it goes actively against what made certain elements of the first game good. Take equipment, for example. You can still equip pieces to your legs, chest, and head, plus a cape for flair, but now you're missing out on all the customization found when equipping under armor and clothing. The first game allowed you to pick certain pieces of clothing that could be worn under your gear, and due to the nature of some designs, this could be used to create a more appealing outfit, while also offering small bonuses to defense or resistances. Why remove that of all things? Was it deemed unimportant? A small feature that wasn't necessary in the first game? That's a dangerous line of thinking in a game like this because it's all of those niche mechanics that add to the overall appeal. What is Dragon's Dogma if not for those features that make it special and stand out from the rest? Like I said already, many perceive the game at a surface level in terms of combat. They need to play the game to learn there's more to it than that. But the more you remove from the equation, the less there is to find and do. There's still plenty, but for a game like this that hasn't seen a sequel in 12 years, you want more features without removing others. You don't remove Strider, Assassin, and Mystic Knight from the game because you added new vocations. You don't limit the skill sets of vocations in comparison to the first game either, because now there are people who have the first game fresh in their mind who feel actively limited in many situations in comparison to what they just experienced, and that's extremely disappointing for a first impression. While fashion and equipment depth have taken a hit in one sense, that doesn't mean it hasn't improved in another. That's what I mean about moving sideways. It's like the game balanced itself in a sense that it removed certain features and made up for them by adding others without moving forward. Upgrading your gear is almost exactly the same as the previous game. You visit a weapon shop, you pay gold for the first upgrade, and the second and third upgrades require combinations of materials and gold to finalize. To make this more elaborate, the region you upgrade the equipment in can dictate what types of changes will be made to the stats of that piece. Vermundian smithing can lower the weight of equipment while raising some of the stats. Meanwhile, Elven smithing has its own properties, and the same can be said for Battahl. In fact, Battahl upgrades actually raise the weight of your gear instead of lowering it, but that's made up for in other ways. Weight matters in this game. It mattered in the original too. You have tiers of encumbrance, and the more you hold, the more affected by the weight you are going to be. You'll move actively slower per tier, expend more stamina, etc. So it can be important early on to keep track of how heavy the gear you are wearing is at the moment. I remember finding a bow that was 10 times heavier than all the other bows in the game, and I didn't realize until I was getting frustrated with how high my encumbrance was. Inventory management is a huge aspect of this game. You need to bring what is important for the journey and be careful not to overindulge, else you could find yourself having a harder time in battle or just traveling slower than is enjoyable. Again, this is a game of preparation. That's one of its biggest appeals. And even when you're a high enough level to one-shot every creature, there will always be things you need to consider bringing with you before heading out on an excursion, allowing every outing to feel earned and rewarding. I've done my fair share of criticizing the vocations, but that doesn't mean they aren't enjoyable in their own right, just different now, and that's both good and bad. Fighter, for example, feels like it pulls from Mystic Knight now. In the previous game, the Mystic Knight class could focus on timed counters with their large shields, allowing you to stagger enemies for an opening. Better yet, they could enchant their shields with elements to add magic damage to the counter. Fighter now has that ability instead as a core skill. Once unlocked, whenever your shield is enchanted, blocking an attack will automatically counter with elemental damage, and you still have the ability to perfect counter, giving the class a more active role as a tank when in combat. The best part is you don't have to play it like that. Fighter has the ability to run into the fray and deal damage efficiently. You have options as the vocation, allowing it to not feel limiting. Skills that allow you to close gaps and attack enemies in the air. inherent abilities that let you defend and press the advantage. The playstyle is up to you. Alternatively, a class like the Thief feels much more focused on dealing damage, with some abilities feeling so powerful I'd call it one of the strongest vocations in the game. It can melt certain enemies just by spamming the same skill because it's just that powerful, but in that sense, it can also begin to feel boring. To make up for this, the class wants you to try new things with it. Thieves have the ability to steal item drops from enemies or pull flying creatures out of the sky. It's one of the classes better designed at climbing a large opponent to reach its weak point. The unfortunate thing is that it sort of conflicts with the fact that you can stand in place most of the time and Beyblade yourself to victory. Balance is an issue here. Thief is strong and has utility, but the utility is overshadowed by the pure strength. It's like you are asked to make a choice. Do you want to play the class in a fun or effective way? Sure, you can be effective with other skills, but when there's no need to, it feels like there's no incentive to try new things. This is a class that can go full ninja mode and start auto-dodging every attack at the cost of stamina. Even one of its stronger abilities that is designed to deal damage to you in the process can be bypassed by entering this mode, and it looks and feels phenomenal to use in battle, but why bother? Why bother doing the cool and somewhat effective thing when the more boring ability is so busted with virtually no downside? Thief is one of the classes I maxed the rank on, but also one I was happy to stop playing because it felt like I was betraying my experience by going through with it. To be clear though, this isn't a sequel-specific issue. Dragon's Dogma 1 has its fair share of balancing problems as well, and every class in 2 is powerful enough at some point. Even though some are more powerful than others, it doesn't mean you won't feel effective unless you are playing a class like Trickster that is designed around the concept of not dealing damage yourself. Archer has effective opportunities to deal damage from range, and there's rings you can equip that raise this damage when close up. So if you are playing an archer but enjoy climbing enemies, there can still be reason to do so. The class just sucks at damage regardless. The game doesn't want to limit your options based on the vocation you choose when it can help it, but due to these balancing issues, you end up being limited in unintended ways. The issue is that unless I am doing something wrong, the damage output of the archer class pales in comparison to something like Thief, or even Fighter, Warrior, Mystic Spear Hand, etc. Balance is the issue here. We have vocations that are too strong in too many ways, making them boring, making their other skills feel useless. Then we have vocations where the entire package is the issue. The Thief and the Archer are the two classes I have the least interest in overall, again ignoring Trickster. I only bring them up now to discuss the issues with some of the vocation decisions so you have an idea of what the game is offering you in case you need an opinion. In truth, I believe you should play every vocation in the game at least once, and you are only helping yourself by raising the ranks fully for each of them due to the augment system. You don't just level up in this game, you level your character and raise the ranks of vocations through use of them. The Warfarer vocation is a bit of a special case because it can level up all vocations when used, although the process is much slower. Fighter is probably one of the base vocations that I found the most engaging because of the parry or counter mechanic with your shield. Once you get the timing right, any fight can become a cakewalk, but only because of your own mechanical skill, not because you shit damage. Similarly, Archer as a ranged class can require you to make skill-based shots from a distance if you wish, or you can use the game's auto-aim ability to bypass this requirement at the cost of accuracy. Not that you'll miss necessarily if your character is locked onto their target, but more that it can sometimes be difficult to get your target to be locked on at all. There's no real targeting mechanic in the game. Certain classes get something similar to one when casting, such as Mage or Sorcerer. Magic Archer has homing arrows that show you when they are locked on, but there's nothing that moves the camera for you to keep track of enemies. I was on a podcast recently where we discussed this concept, and while we came to the conclusion that the game doesn't necessarily need it, I am still of the mind that it would have been better if included. If I'm going to be able to auto-aim at creatures using my bow, I would at least like to have more control in selecting which enemies I am targeting, without having to go into manual aim to do so. Balance it by making the auto-fire mechanic weaker than manual aiming or something like that. Oh wait, they already do that. The point I'm making is, if for some reason a key feature like targeting wasn't in the game because it would have been too powerful or something, find ways to balance that out because, while not crucial, it's a mechanic that has seen so much success for a reason. This was the same in the original game as well, and I believe both entries would feel improved if it was a default mechanic for all vocations. The other base class, Mage, is another I spent the least amount of time with, but it's also one of the more interesting in terms of utility overall. Mages have damage dealing abilities, sure, but where they shine is in their ability to buff and heal the party. Anodyne was such a strong and necessary ability to have in your party within the first game that I am not surprised it became a default for Mage. But by making such an important aspect of the Mage default, this prevents many mages from having differing identities between one another. Sure, heal mages were popular in the original game, but not all mages had to heal. Now every mage is a heal mage, and it feels weird diverging from that design because they have very powerful abilities that can cover any situation. They can cure debilitations, cast haste, lower stamina depletion, heal over time, instant heal, and more. The purpose of the class was set in stone, at least when assigned to a pawn. It feels like the only reason it even has the ability to deal damage is in case you choose to play the vocation as your Arisen. Sorcerer, meanwhile, is a class I love to have in my party, especially when you receive the 2 Meister skills for it. Maelstrom and Meteoron are nuke tier abilities that, when assigned to a pawn, allow them to fill the map with so much damage that you can focus on anything else you desire. If you can see anything, that is. In terms of enjoyability, the class feels absolutely neutered in comparison to what it once was. Sorcerer used to feel like an upgraded version of the Mage at the cost of some utility and all healing options. Abilities like Holy Affinity and Dark Affinity are completely absent from the sequel, as well as skills like Miasma for poisoning foes, Necromancy for summoning skeletons, and Lassitude for inflicting torpor. The Sorcerer has a treasure trove of skills to choose from, and you could equip a great selection of them while still giving yourself some buff abilities if you wanted, because the game lets you hold more than 4 active skills at a given time. Sorcerer had over 25 unique spells to make use of, with some overlap between it and Mage. In comparison, we now have something like 11? I'm not counting upgraded versions of either of these. What a waste. If you had a party entirely composed of sorcerers in the first game, you could do so with no skill overlap if you wished. This is not the case here any longer, which I find odd since we are apparently so focused on vocation identity, Itsuno. How can you claim to care about that when you wipe out half of what made Sorcerer unique in the first place? This is a similar issue with Mage as well. Out of all the classes to get hit the hardest within Dragon's Dogma 2, none were hit worse than the Spellcasters, and it's impossible for me to reason why they would do that. Why limit something like this in a game where you have designed it to offer limitless opportunities? It's working actively against what the original game tried to do. Why? The complexity was the best part. Trying to simplify these things works actively against the original design. Warrior truly is the class to come out ahead. Not only does it now have an extra skill to equip instead of 3, but it feels like a more active class to play overall. You aren't just some slow, lumbering wall, and you no longer break your chain of attack when whiffing against enemies. The speed of the class has actively been improved as well. When playing Warrior now, if you time your attacks with the backswing, you get to attack again sooner, instead of one slow attack after another. Now you can be rewarded for paying attention to your own attacks when in combat. Plus, they added a new tackle ability to the class that can technically cancel out some of the slower animations while also giving you crazy knockdown resistance and flinching enemies more easily. Just leaps and bounds better than it once was. How did they know to improve Warrior but somehow beat Sorcerer and Mage half to death in an alleyway? It's funny because most of what the game is doing right with Vocations, or what is the most interesting, isn't as interesting for me to delve into because it's basically the same as the previous game. The things that the game did wrong, the original did right, and the things it did right are just the same as what I covered in my retrospective. Augments remain largely unchanged as a mechanic. For example, you kill enemies to earn discipline points, and earning said points ranks up your vocation. You can then spend those points on skills, abilities, and augments that become available as you progress. Augments are especially important because once unlocked, you can equip it regardless of what vocation you are playing, meaning there's a huge incentive to try everything out in the game and find what works for you, but also learn how to play the things that don't work as well because they may have augments you want for your favorite class. That's a great system. Borderline revolutionary. or it would be, except that was introduced in the first game and one of the things that made the first game so great. There's things that make Dragon's Dogma 2 great, but most of those aren't even improvements on the mechanics from the first game. They are just the mechanics unchanged. The biggest advancements we get from the sequel include things like graphics, quality of life, the map itself, etc. To talk about the mechanics that really shine in this game that overlap with the original, things like forgeries or side quest consequences or climbing monsters, that all feels like I'm just retreading old ground. If you want to know how good the basics of the game are, I have an entire retrospective singing its praises. There are things worth noting, of course, and I like to hope while writing this that we will soon be in a more positive section of the video because I am actively getting discouraged as the criticisms fill my mind. That's because the game is so strong thanks to the original. You can play Dragon's Dogma 2 from start to finish and be wowed by everything that the original did first or better, and then continue to be impressed with some newer features and events that we haven't explored quite yet. Don't get me wrong, I clearly believe there's a lot of bad to discuss here, but it's important to focus on it because the game is so good in so many other ways that all I want is to see it improved where it's at its weakest. I want the ultimate Dragon's Dogma experience, and you see that break through from time to time. The personality of the sequel is overshadowed by the original, but it's there and it tries to show you. For example, they made unlocking new vocations a more active part of the adventure. In the original game, you just had to make it to Grand Sorin and you were good to go. Pay some discipline points and you now have the ability to play the vocation. Vocations need to be earned now. If you want Sorcerer and Warrior, you need to help the Vocation Guild get their shipment of weapons back so that they can outfit you, or just find the weapons yourself from literally anywhere and deliver them. If you want Mystic Spearhand, Trickster, Magic Archer, or Warfarer, you need to find the individuals who are talented within these vocations so that they can unlock them for you. And many of these people are also the Meisters for their respective skill set, another new feature that is required for you to unlock some of the stronger abilities in the game. It's not as simple as leveling up. You need to explore the world, seek out individuals who can better you in the arts of whatever you are using at the time, and find a way to convince them to help you. Maybe complete a quest, maybe kill a dragon, maybe feed into a man's crippling alcohol addiction. Who knows? That's great. That's a pure improvement on the original. Then you have something like the game's crafting system that has been simplified greatly. You used to have flasks that you could store various liquids in and then use those liquids to make specific items. You used to be able to use airtight flasks to keep perishables fresh. Now all you do is combine fruits and other plants to make healing items plus some other unique curatives, a few. There's less options and it's more simplistic. The game's design choices here are give and take from the original. Let's switch to a more positive note. I feel as though I've spent far too much time venting the frustrations that have come to me while writing this script. I want to instead focus on how the game has been improved, and if not improved, how it manages to still do certain aspects of design better than anything else I've experienced in a long while. Believe it or not, despite the grievances that we've gone over so far, I am still adamant that Dragon's Dogma 2 is one of the best games of the year. I know it feels a bit early to say that, but this is the type of game that, despite its flaws, I can replay continuously for over 3 playthroughs and counting. It's because what the game does right is so strong. When you exit out of Vermund, you can feel the sense of scale as the mountains ahead tower over you. Off in the distance is a griffin causing problems for the local farmers, and you can go help deal with that only to grab on as the griffin takes off, flying across the map. Next thing you know, you're in the middle of a forest where there is a perpetual mist, causing the location to constantly be within a nighttime state, meaning it's infested with skeletons and zombies. You find the center of the lake while you're there, and your friend Gregor is fighting a Doulahan, and you need to save him before he dies so he can make it back to his wife. You continue to explore the area, finding some rocks to climb up to get you out of the mist. There you find some ruins, and within those ruins is a unique creature, a Sphinx. The Sphinx talks to you, asking you to solve a series of riddles. Every outing in the game has the opportunity to be an unexpected adventure where you will experience something new, and the game is at its height when it is openly attempting to facilitate this for you. It attempts to fill these locations with interesting encounters. Sure, you're fighting through swaths of enemies along the way, definitely too many, but the payoff is when you run into something like the Sphinx, something completely unique and unmatched.
My,
That's quite a number. And the correct one, no less. Of course, your erudition shan't go unrewarded.
The Sphinx was marketed as being one of the most unique quests in the game, and while true, it isn't as intense as most were led to believe. Since Dragon's Dogma has a single save file, it was implied that failing a riddle would lock you out of being able to complete it. This is a half-truth. The single save file in the game is not as scary as it seems, since you have the ability to save whenever you want on the go, but also have the ability to make a technically separate inn save that you can always go back to. Anytime you sleep at an inn, you are creating a save point that is separate from the auto/manual saves you make while out and about. Creating an inn save before visiting the Sphinx is a safe way to attempt to get all riddles solved, just in case you make a mistake, and while I recommend not doing that the first time, I do understand why you may want to. We talk about player antagonistic design, and the Sphinx is the personification of this. Sometimes failing a riddle is not the worst thing that can happen to you. Failing a single riddle could let you move on to the next. However, questioning your own answer may be enough to cause the Sphinx to fly away forever. She's finicky, she's particular, and she is only interested in those with the wits and confidence to play her game, and the devs have found a way to showcase that in her design by punishing you the moment you second guess yourself. Finding the Sphinx is already a challenge in itself. It's a scenario where you need to go out of your way to end up here. You need to be exploring one of two key locations at least. The first time I found it was after visiting the checkpoint rest town between Vermund and Battahl. A merchant mentioned an area known as the Ancient Battleground to the north, and this was my first time thinking I should go check that out. Sure enough, there's a large battlefield, and the first thing you see when you arrive is a drake fighting a Cyclops who is getting absolutely pulverized. This could very well be the first time you're seeing a drake out in the wild, as it's a static location for one of them, and more likely than not, you are not ready for this encounter just yet. That's the beauty of this game though, or at least what it is supposed to be. You will want to explore, but the world off the beaten path is a dangerous place. A place where you need to learn to run past these dangers in order to make it to a rewarding destination sometimes. If you make it past the battle, you may receive a side quest to escort a priest-like man into the nearby fort so he can complete a ceremony where he needs to ring a bell. You take him up through the fort to the bell where there is a unique spell book to loot for a later quest down the line. I found out that taking the book early makes it impossible to complete the bell quest until you put it back, so nice attention to detail there. If you continue to explore the fort, you may find a hidden cave. Follow the cave through and you arrive at an ancient shrine where the Sphinx is waiting for you. You just spent half an hour exploring a battlefield, running from a dragon, completing a quest, and finding unique loot. You are now thrust into another intense experience before you get to take a breather. That's how the game tries to keep you exploring, by connecting unique and interesting experiences one after the other so you feel compelled to keep moving forward. Out of everything within the game, the Sphinx is the most intimidating creature I've come across. The amalgamation of a human face on the body of a lion with wings, with these giant eyes and the big, toothy RE engine style smile. The way the eyes stare into your soul when you solve a riddle and the pupils shrink, giving you the unnerving feeling that you are about to be attacked at any moment. That one wrong move could be your last. You can tell the Sphinx is a powerful, wondrous creature. When you first approach the Sphinx, you will be subjected to 5 riddles. You get to choose the order that you complete them, though some are better to complete before others. She's not just asking you a question only for you to pick from a set of multiple choice answers, it's more creative than that. First, you are tasked with finding the highest value item within a nearby cave. If you make it through the entirety of the cave, you find a chest, and within that chest is a rotten apple. It's a trick. The apple isn't valuable, and as you make your way back, you will find another chest hidden above the entrance containing a magical vial. This is the item you need, and one that can be used for another riddle moving forward. See, there's another task where you are basically asked to bring someone to the shrine who has the maximum amount of affection towards you. This can be done a number of ways. The hard way would be to carry them all the way back. Alternatively, you could place a port crystal by the Sphinx and then fairy stone them there. If you want to get really creative, you can use the file one time to magically place the individual in the container and then head back, break the file, and release them so that they can be presented to the Sphinx. You have 3 options on how you make this riddle work, and the file is so unique that you can't even place it in your storage. It's not meant to make it into multiple playthroughs with you. I love these options. I love absurdity, and these aren't even the most absurd. There's a riddle that gives you 7 in-game days to find the location where you found your first Seeker token. Do you remember where that was? I did not. I got lucky because I was streaming it at the time and pulled up the VOD live to figure it out. It's such a hard ask, such a mean thing to get the player to look for. But when you do find it, it's such a cathartic feeling. The spot where the Seeker's token previously was will now have a special item known as a Finder's token. The best part, you can make forgeries of this token and the Sphinx will accept them for the riddle, meaning you could make multiples for multiple playthroughs. To be honest with you, the only thing I don't know about the Sphinx is what happens if you don't pick up a token before seeing her, even on a new playthrough, since she only counts the first token you found per run. One of the most brilliant riddles is when she asks you to find her parents. Obviously, there aren't other Sphinx in the game, so you need to find Capcom-created pawns named Sphinx Father, Sphinx Mother, or Sphinx Parent. An amazing use of the pawn system that I believe many would never even fathom the idea of. And then you're thinking, okay, I completed all the riddles, I'm finally going to get to see what is in this giant chest behind her, but no. The Sphinx has some more riddles for you in another location and takes off, meaning that you need to go and find her again. Or you could jump onto her before she leaves and she'll fly you all the way there. Are you kidding me? That's wild. That is a wonder. That's what the game is the best at, where it shines. Wonder is the goal of Dragon's Dogma, to create scenarios where you will be wowed at every single idea that the developers came up with. Every decision feels specifically designed to challenge the player in unconventional ways, to put you in scenarios where you'll do things you never thought would be necessary, and through that, it creates a sense of wonder and amazement that is the ultimate goal of the game's experience. The later riddles aren't as interesting as the initial ones personally, but one that you complete does offer an unmaking arrow, a unique item that was in the first game as well and allows you to one-shot an enemy if you were using a bow. You get a one-shot item for a boss in the game. Medusa, Talos, the dragon. It works on everything. And so you finish the second round of riddles and you are eager to open the big golden chest, and what happens? Nothing. The Sphinx flies away again, not to return. So what do? Well, you can enter combat with her and fight her for the key. A sort of final test, if you will, because if you deplete her HP, she calls you a moron and flies away anyway. I thought it was another riddle. I thought you need to use the unmaking arrow on her in order to win, and this doesn't seem to properly kill her, even though it kills everything else. The Sphinx has to be one of the most mystical and powerful creatures in the game, and you just spent time solving riddles with her for over an hour. And Future Super Ad here, turns out this is not the only way to win the fight. You can save yourself the unmaking arrow by investigating the murals of the Sphinx throughout the world. According to Punk Duck, who I talked to about this, the murals inform you that the human parts of the Sphinx's head are weaker. To the Sphinx, this is cheating, so the trick is to defeat her without ever hitting her head. I don't know. I didn't actually try it, so it's all anecdotal, but I mean, try it yourself, see if it works. Dragon's Dogma is the type of game where every time you think outside of the box, you are rewarded for it, and the rewards were fantastic. You get fairy stones, wake stones, the ring of eternal bonding, and a one-shot arrow. And what's in the final chest? A very special item known as an eternal wake stone that is said to revive multiple individuals at once instead of singular individuals per wake stone. Why is that so special? Why is it important? Well, let's talk about the most controversial mechanic in the game thus far. I think the biggest issue that people have with this mechanic is that it isn't very clear what the actual aftermath will be. It's hard to critique the game for that because every unique mechanic is similar in its own way. It's part of the appeal. Playthroughs do not need to be perfect. The game attempts to actively prevent you from having a perfect playthrough at all turns, and a lot of players aren't able to handle that. They feel a need to be able to do everything as they please regardless of the intentions of the developer. The same people that claim that this intention or vision of the developer is the end-all be-all are the same people that get mad when the developer makes it difficult for them to do what they want. Dragonsplague is the mechanic in question. A pawn can become infected by another pawn when they are within the same party. This is apparently the intentional way of curing themselves from what I understand. Spreading the plague cures the currently infected pawn, but who Patient Zero was, I have no idea. By the mechanics of hiring pawns, it is a disease that can be spread widely and quickly, and can be hard for some players to realize it's happening. Dragonsplague causes the eyes to glow red as it progresses. You see it in the dark when talking to your pawns. You'll most likely first notice the issues begin to arise when you hear your pawn being belligerent. If left unchecked, it can have some catastrophic consequences. If the plague is in its final stage of incubation and you sleep at an inn, your pawn will transform into a dragon and lay waste to the settlement you just slept in, killing every NPC in the process. Seriously killing them. It'll be an ocean of corpses as you traverse the streets. What is there to do about this? Is the save bricked considering even important NPCs can die like this? Well, no. The game has a great mechanic surrounding wake stones. Important NPCs, even hostile ones that may be your enemy, can be revived using a wake stone. It's how you save an individual in DD1 after killing him so that he can be arrested and then you get a unique shield in the process. But you aren't going to be finding enough wake stones in an initial playthrough to save the entire city, so are you expected to just resurrect the few that you can so that you can continue the game? No, of course not. Are you expected to spend real-world money to buy 5 wake stones on the Steam page in order to save your playthrough? No, you fucking idiot. That's the silliest thing I've ever heard. Even a game like this wouldn't put you through the ringer without a contingency. The contingency is the internal wake stone. If used in a city that was hit with the plague, it will instantly revive everyone so that your playthrough is back to normal and you'll get an achievement to boot. But what if you don't have the wake stone? Well, you can go get it. What if you miss your chance and the Sphinx is gone? Well, then yeah, your save is bricked. Just kidding. People have found out that if you wait enough in-game days, these important NPCs will respawn because it would be a little too extreme to truly ruin the playthrough over something so obtuse. This is still anecdotal at the moment, but I mean, a game is supposed to be fun after all, to some capacity, right? There really is no incentive to brick a player's save. The best way I reason the mechanic out is that people have their own wake stones and use them to bring back who was necessary. The reasoning isn't important here. The important thing is that some people adore this mechanic while others hate it. I, of course, think it's amazing. I want games to do shit like this more often. I want them to try and wipe out half of my game's map if I step on the wrong spider in the wrong cave because it's interesting when these experiences are willing to defy conventions. Like I said, the biggest issue is how obscure the mechanic is. I can understand some people getting mad about it because they don't understand it. They panic, think it's over, but it's not, and hopefully that knowledge will help you better appreciate it because you aren't going to get experiences like this very often. And when or if it does happen to you, hopefully you have a better idea on how to spot it. Is a pawn being belligerent? Throw them into the brine. Are their eyes glowing red? Into the brine. Do you just not like them? Into the brine. Or you could just dismiss them. I like my way better. I appreciate the game going the extra mile here because the extra mile is what is necessary to help the game stand on its own, to outshine its predecessors in some way, to be a sequel. It's a worthy inclusion because of that, and I think players need to be more open-minded with mechanics like this when the entire game has been marketed as a series of similar experiences. The game wouldn't be as special as it is without these mechanics, without this obtuseness, the ability and the courage to be different. It wouldn't be special if it wasn't willing to take chances, and one of the prime examples of that is the Dragonsplague. And luckily for those who are not a fan of these extremes, I would say the Sphinx and the Plague are the two most extreme examples of the game's philosophy until the end of the game. The philosophy of wonder and tying it to challenge and antagonism. To dislike the concept of Dragonsplague is not wrong, but it is to dislike the entire design philosophy of the series, meaning I imagine Dragon's Dogma might not be for you. These are mechanics and concepts you have to go out of your way for, but what about the things we are more likely to run into? Well, I'm happy to say that the majority of all quests from story to side content manage to be interesting in their own ways, with many looking to showcase various design features to the player.
Great! Keep your distance, Arisen! Worry not for me. The brine may swallow me whole, but I will not perish. There is a stone not far from here, known as a rift stone. Pray, seek it out. If you're truly the Arisen, then our paths will surely cross again.
When you first land in Vermund off the back of a now deceased griffin, the first thing you are shown is Asmongold getting devoured by the brine. Well, it's actually Rook from the first game here to help us briefly as a callback, but I mean, come on, the resemblance is kind of uncanny. Now on your own, we end up getting escorted to the encampment where things begin to open up for us. Shops become available, the Riftstone and our pawn show up, and the inn is now accessible. You're going to be spending a lot of time at inns in this game. Inns and the Vocation Guild, but mostly the inns, since they both allow you to pass time throughout the game and fully heal your fatigue. You cannot simply heal in Dragon's Dogma because there is a fatigue system. Every time you take significant damage, you lose a bit of your maximum health, and the only way to get it back is through sleeping at the inn for money or going camping. You can pass time on various benches if you want to save some cash, but it isn't going to heal your fatigue. Still worthwhile though, since many quest objectives are specific to a certain time of day. You need to walk to the city of Melve first before you can make your way to Vermund, and by this point you have amnesia and don't really understand that you are the Arisen, meaning I'm sure new players to the series are a bit confused already. Luckily, once you reach Melve, a flashback occurs showing how you seem to be part of the Vermundian militia and were defending the town against the dragon. The scene shows the dragon take our heart, making us Arisen in the process, and we soon exit the flashback, waking up in the home of Ulrika, who explains that this is the second time she watched over us, the first being when we saved her from the dragon attack. Ulrika is one of the affinity/side quest characters of the game. It's kind of her entire purpose. She has some backstory and growth, but the goal of that is to not see her advance as a character, but rather become a romantic interest to the Arisen. Technically, any NPC has the opportunity to have their affinity maxed out, but there are certain characters that are designed for this purpose since their quest lines are almost guaranteed to max their affinity once completed. These characters rarely have any important value within the main storyline though, which can be a bit disappointing. Some are storyline adjacent though, such as Ulrika and Wilhelmina, but others like Glindweir, who I'm just going to call Glyn from now on, only have story relevance in the endgame of all places. Still, many of these side quests are involved, and completing them can often be necessary in order to take part in future quests, to get things done in endgame, or even to progress through the storyline. If you don't help the elves with an issue surrounding their sacred tree, you will not be able to save their community later on when the world is ending. Spoiler alert. Again, I've done it a bunch at this time. Do not come into my comments angry about these spoilers because I alerted you about them. This encounter in Melve is where we get our first taste of what the main storyline is going to focus on. A man named Gregor heard word that an Arisen had shown up and now looks to bring us to the capital to be vetted since the Arisen is the rightful ruler of the realm by law. The problem is that there's already an Arisen in the capital, even though there can only be one at a time, meaning an investigation is necessary. This is the plotline for the majority of the game. I've seen people complain that the original game's story was lackluster, but it is leaps and bounds better than what we are going to experience moving forward in Dragon's Dogma 2. The first game had its own form of politics, sure, but we are still spending a good portion of our time actively learning about our role as the Arisen. I believe that someone playing through 2, having not played the first, would not understand that it is their duty to kill the dragon, other than because it is causing destruction and you may feel obligated. The Arisen is the mirror of the dragon. It's a fated opponent and we must be the ones to defeat it. Yet no one is prepared to do so, and the game doesn't focus on the concept at all until the end of the game when you finally run into him for the first time since you had your heart stolen. In the first game, everyone is looking to fight the dragon. Everyone is aware that you are the Arisen and asks for your help in various quests to prepare for the battle ahead. You even go off to meet the Dragonforged, who is basically a lore dump mechanic there to help you better understand the role of dragon and Arisen. There are side quests centered around the lore of the pawns, how they eventually develop wills of their own, how they begin to look like they're Arisen and become human. The lore of pawns is incredibly important to the rules of the world and the cycle. It has depth and gets explored heavily in both the first game and the Dark Arisen expansion, and then it all comes to a head when you finally become Seneschal and use the God's Bane on yourself. You get none of that in Dragon's Dogma 2. There's no exploration into the pawns, no foreshadowing about the Seneschal, no real talk of the cycle, at least not until the end of the game. No one is focusing on the threat of the dragon except for some perceivably evil individuals from Battahl, and the entire storyline of the game decides to focus just on the Arisen's struggle to become Lord and stop the Queen Regent from usurping the throne. Meanwhile, dragons are plaguing the lands, but for some reason this is not important to the setting until we finish up in Battahl. Any important lore from the first game feels like it was left out in this one because they didn't want to repeat themselves. But these two games have a 12-year release gap, and overlap is fine when it is important to the world building of your very convoluted setting. Newer players are going to worry about the political struggle, forget about the dragon entirely, skip ahead because the story just ends abruptly, and then be lore dumped and monologued at for an hour with so much information that only holds real value if you have the context from the first game that it's going to feel meaningless. It's a travesty. As a companion piece to the original game, Dragon's Dogma 2 feels more like an expansion that wants to elaborate on concepts it expects you to already know, rather than a new game that needs to bring up some past information so that everyone is on the same page. Gregor will escort you to Vernworth whenever you're ready, and by this point you can complete something like 4 miniature side quests before leaving, 2 at the encampment you started in and another 2 in Melve. The one where you need to get a fruit mixture for some kid is at least somewhat important because it leads to a discount in Vernworth later on. So this is my warning to you to always do every quest you come across because there is always a chance it will matter moving forward. A little jog with Gregor and he'll open a gate by the encampment so that you can all move forward. It's at this point that I assume the game is now fully open. You could go from here to Battahl or further if you really wanted to, but I do recommend getting to Vernworth first, and this may still technically be a requirement before you are truly free to do whatever you want. What's a bit disappointing about the presentation of the game is that you end up in this semi-scripted fight against the Cyclops, and it was a fight that was used in the marketing of the game very often. This is because there's a nearby set of rocks that can be blown away to cause a flood that will deal damage to the Cyclops, potentially killing it in the process. The disappointment is that this was the main showcase of environmental damage within battles and implied there'd be more interactions with destructible environments moving forward throughout the game. In reality, this is not the case, at least not that much. Enemies can still react to the environment sometimes. The best example is when a Cyclops falls over a cliff and grabs the other side, forming a bridge. Or you destroy a wooden bridge to cause enemies to plummet to their death. You can throw enemies from high locations or into the brine to kill them instantly. Remember the brine, it's actually important in the game this time, so keep it in mind. I wanted a bit more out of the environment personally. It felt like they were promising more to me at least. On the way to that Cyclops I mentioned, you see a cliffside collapse in on itself, causing a landslide. I thought that was going to be a big factor in some battles moving forward. But the closest you get to that are some destructible boulders placed on hillsides every so often. I can understand marketing kind of stretching the truth. I'm not happy about it, but I can at least understand it. The game itself stretching the truth mid-playthrough? Come on, Itsuno. You eventually get to use your first ox cart if you want, or you can walk the rest of the way to Vernworth. There you are interrogated privately by Captain Brandt, who informs you that he was putting on a facade so as to not arouse suspicion, and that he knows you are the true Arisen. Apparently after the attack, you were sent away and some curse was placed on you to wipe your memory, explaining why you were in the excavation site jail back in the volcanic region. If you played Dragon's Dogma 1, the Brandt quests are going to feel familiar to you. Similar to when we did the Worm Hunt quest, where we were given a list of different objectives to complete before we would be allowed to move on to the next stage of the storyline, it's the same here. We meet with Brandt at the local tavern at night, he shows us a list of quests, and we complete the important ones in order to progress the storyline while having a few optional ones thrown in there to learn more about the situation and for greater rewards. Almost all of these quests are interesting in their own right. The least interesting is probably monster culling, since all you were doing is going to 3 separate locations to kill some monsters. However, one of these locations takes place in a cave within the destroyed village of Harv, and this is an area you'll be returning to periodically if you plan on completing side quests. This is because Harv has been attacked by Saurians. As you exit the cave after saving some of the soldiers, a villager will ask you for your aid in defeating some Saurians that are rampaging around. You're then asked to return later to see how the village is doing, and that's something you will be asked to do a lot. The game wants you to not rush it, and that's very apparent considering how short the main quest line is. It wants you to take the opportunity to explore, so rather than advancing the quest right away, it makes you pump the brakes so you feel inclined to do something else. I'm fine with that. I think it's a good way of guiding the player to finding more within the world and helps prevent them rushing past missable quests and items. A way for the game to tell you that if you rush, you're only punishing yourself and lessening the experience. Disa is the Queen Regent out to get you because she wants her son Sven to be in charge once he's older. The quest Disa's Plot sees us sneaking into the castle in order to find evidence of her misdeeds. I didn't understand that there was a proper way to do this originally. You get escorted to the back door and then there's a nearby uniform you can equip to blend in with the guards. But it is an unnecessary endeavor because I straight up ran to the objective and no one even looked the other way. I'm not even sure how you trigger them to chase after you or if they chase after you at all. I've seen people get imprisoned in the game, and I've never had that happen to me. When you reach the room, you'll be interrupted by running into Sven. This is technically the second or third or fourth time you meet him, as you bumped into him just after meeting with Captain Brandt for the first time when the boy was being chased by a guard. When you first meet Sven, you assume he's a street urchin or a pickpocket, not the son of the strongest woman in the realm. You can meet with him multiple times throughout your journey before completing this specific quest. He will ask you to lend him some money to purchase an item that he has his eye on, and you can do so if you wish, or you can buy the item and hand it to him instead, which is an option I love because the shop he buys it from is the man who now offers you a discount because you helped his daughter back in Melv. So you can buy it cheaper than Sven could, trade it to him, and he will eventually pay you back and then some, meaning you have the opportunity to make a larger profit, even if it is small in the grand scheme of things. If you didn't complete his full quest line, Sven still recognizes you when you break into the palace, but it turns out he's on our side and wants to aid in bringing the misdeeds of the Queen to light. He helps us escape by pointing out a nearby window, and we'll work with him again in the future. The caged magistrate sees us needing to free an imprisoned noble because he was unwilling to help the Queen push her son onto the throne. It's potentially the most confusing storyline quest to complete because when you break into the jail to free him, he isn't willing to leave. Grant gives us a key to the jail, and I do recommend forging a duplicate of it because it's an infinite use item and jail keys work for all jails in the game for some reason. The key to Vernworth jails work in the Battahl ones, and I don't know why. Not very good security in my opinion. And yeah, forgeries are back in the game and just as amazing an idea as ever. I have talked in length about the Jadeite Orb quest in a previous preview video that was specifically designed to incentivize you to use forgeries. But there's plenty of other uses for them. The Finder's token from the Sphinx can be duplicated, keys can be duplicated if you want, and there's even a set of rare books that I suggest duplicating multiples of, as 2 Meisters require the same books to complete their quest lines. Even more broken, apparently you can make forgeries of monster materials and they somehow work when enhancing your gear. Pretty sure this happened in the first game as well, and I just never thought to try it. It's one of my favorite mechanics in the game. I just wish there was more unique reasons to make use of it. The most useful of anything is the key, and once you have one, that's it for the rest of your playthroughs because they don't break if they're normal keys. On the topic of keys, there's an odd thing about the ancient battleground. You can find a makeshift vault key when you are there. The key is makeshift because it can only be used once before being destroyed. It says as much in the description, but for whatever reason, when I used it in the vaults of Vernworth's castle, it didn't break on me. I don't know if this was a bug or what, but just felt like mentioning it because that's a little odd. Make sure you get that key though, as the vault is a worthwhile location to stop by. There's like 20,000 gold in there, plus a mirror shield of all things that has an actual function we'll talk about later on. Yeah, there's a key in a far-off area of Vermund that opens a door in the castle that gives you a shield to use in a specific location in Battahl if you want. If you want to find it, if you do find it. So we have this key for the jail and we can reach the magistrate either by brute forcing our way in or I assume using the disguise a second time. The issue is he won't leave, so how do we convince him to? I mentioned this in my initial review, but they tied this main quest to a side quest. By giving food or a monetary donation multiple times to the Gracious Hand service, a man will ask you to find a missing boy, leading to the unearthing of an old vault of tomes under the city. You can then send the magistrate there since he wants to spend all of his time reading. Now, there's a quest where you have to infiltrate a masquerade by dressing in noble's clothes with a mask at night, but you have to go on a night when they are actually hosting one as it isn't all the time. You need to find a hidden door in the wall to progress without much indication that it's there. You get a membership card to the bordello for completing this, and can then use said bordello if that's your thing, considering it seems to be the most useless mechanic in the game. I do have the platinum card though. It was traded to me, I swear. There's even another quest where you break into the castle to find more evidence and you have to find another hidden door in the wall. The amount of people I saw getting stuck here was both hilarious and staggering. Someone will randomly start following you as you progress through these quests, and you can chase after them and capture them so that they can be interrogated later, which leads to a small quest completion reward and more info about what Battahl wants with you. Finally, there's another quest where you need to learn about who the false sovereign was before all of this. You travel to a far-off village where you need to play detective to figure out what's really going on here. A merchant greets you and warns you away, and you need to poke around town until you are given the clues you need to find a secret thief training ground. You then need to complete the training ground Wind Waker style until you make it to the end and impress everyone in the village because they were all a guild of super thieves, and the current sovereign used to be one of them before getting exiled. You could stumble upon the cave yourself, but if you are having trouble, a woman tails you and then suggests that you do the same to someone else only if you catch her in the act. Yes, detective work. I love that in a game. I love detective games. Every quest on your way to the coronation is meant to offer its own unique experience and wonder, put you in situations you wouldn't expect to find in a typical fantasy RPG while building reputation for your Arisen so you can contest the current sovereign. Unfortunately, it's all for naught. When you are ready to contest them at their coronation, something pains your pawn and you are forced to retreat. It turns out to be an item known as the Godsway, and the investigation into it is meant to be the second act of the game and the organic reason to enter Battahl, but I have bad news. If you thought there was going to be another half of the storyline to take part in, you are sorely mistaken. The storyline of Dragon's Dogma 2 essentially ends here. You complete the acts to try and overthrow the Sovereign, and then you have a couple of quests once you enter Battahl that are all designed to fast track you to the end of the game. We'll discuss it when we get there, but the story of DD2 feels almost unfinished with how hard the whiplash is here. You go from this immense build-up and mystery to a complete 180 on a roller coaster to a dragon fight that you never expected to be so close. Before we start complaining about that, let's talk more about some of the side quests to be found. Gift of the Bow was one of the first quests I picked up when I arrived in Vermund. There's an elf man named Glyn standing by the local weapons shop, interested in picking up a human bow since he has been having trouble with elven ones. In the world of Dragon's Dogma 2, we have a few new races, those being elves, beastren, and dwarves. While you can't play as elves and dwarves, you do still get to explore their customs somewhat, although not to the level as something like Dragon Age Origins, which goes deep into the societal issues of the dwarven people within their universe, and the elves are also there. Elves have their own language, their own culture, and their own customs, and Glyn here is one of the few elves that has gone out of his way to learn English, or whatever they call it in this world. Even the way they use their bows is considered different between the Elvish and the people of Vermund. Where you could keenly aim with a human bow, an elf bow seems to be more akin to hip firing and just feeling things out in your gut. Glyn is having issues with his aim, and he can't be considered an adult by his people until he completes a trial of archery. He hopes that by getting his hands on a human bow, he could learn their way of shooting and hopefully regain his composure for the trial. You can offer any normal bow to Glyn, and he'll then ask you to help him learn how to use it in some ruins near his home. This is one of the only times I've ever seen a quest require you to be a specific vocation. It can be pretty rough, especially if you get the quest early on. I was a low level and a low rank fighter. Now I was a low level and a fresh archer, meaning the journey from Vermund to the ruins was going to be a precarious one. But as long as I stick to the road and don't venture too far off the beaten path, I should be fine. Right? Right? This was the first time I got my ass beat in the game, walking down the road only to get blindsided by a minotaur who is placed behind a cliffside so he can ambush you. Worse yet, he blends into the oxen that are scattered around so you are none the wiser until it's too late. Placements like that, where they feel natural, are an exception to the issues I have with how dense the creatures are in this game. Minotaurs have enough intellect to create their own tools and to ambush people. It makes sense you would run into one of them on the road, and even though it's a difficult fight early on, they are still one of the weaker enemies in the game, so there's a chance you'll survive or you could always run away. Plus, NPCs on the road often come to your aid in times of strife. The guards of ox carts can be the deciding factor in a battle during the early hours of the game. You may think this is why there are more enemies and more powerful enemies on the road, but make no mistake, these carts make virtually no difference moving forward because the power creep on your character is just absurd. The ability to have NPCs fight with you is in no means a justification for just how many enemies you are going to run into when you want to take a short jog down the road. But they place a chimera not 2 steps away from Glyn when we go to meet him in the ruins a second time, and for whatever reason, the rare griffin from the first game is hyper prevalent now. Countless battles I had have turned into something more annoying because a griffin has shown up yet again, even though I've slaughtered their entire lineage. Rather than being paced like a treat to add to the encounter every so often, any battle could include a random griffin, golem, cyclops, ogre, etc. Even when you are just outside the city gates of somewhere like Battahl, it gets exhausting, especially since this density feels as though it is increased once you reach Battahl proper. So this short journey early in the game to meet with Glyn has one challenging fight that I believe is deserved, but it gets worse and worse the more you explore the paths of the map without stepping foot into the surrounding forests around you. The worst part is having to do it as an archer if you haven't been ranking it up. It's weak regardless too, so it's a torturous endeavor. I can partially justify it though. Dragon's Dogma is not a game where you throw yourself at something until it sticks. If something is difficult for you, you should come back later. Very few of these quests are actually timed, and Glyn will wait for you to do other quests and get more powerful. And when a quest is timed, it's usually an easier encounter like the boy who gets dragged off by wolves that you need to save near the checkpoint rest town. There's a much harder Doulahan boss fight quest, but you don't even need to beat him to complete it as he'll run away halfway through unless you are melting his HP bar. The game doesn't mind making you miss content, but the ability to actually miss it when the quest is active is few and far between. When we do reach Glyn, all we need to do is shoot a nearby target, giving him the knowledge and confidence to make the shot on his own, which he does with ease. We then have to hoof it back to Vernworth or complete other nearby side quests depending on your progression. The nice thing about it is that you have a good chance of running into an ox cart already on the road, meaning you can catch a ride since you probably don't have a port crystal as of yet. Although Vernworth does have a static port crystal, so if you have a fairy stone, you can just head back that way. Continuing with this sub-storyline, Glyn will find us in Vernworth again and ask us to witness his trial of archery within the home of the elves. We can meet him near the ruins again, and this is where the Chimera was waiting for me, so I had to learn to sneak up to Glyn from a different location and get him moving before he aggravated the thing. The Sacred Arbor is the home of the elves. As long as Glyn is with us, the game will register their language as translated, meaning we can read what they are saying and communicate properly. Without this, or without a pawn specialization for it, all dialogue will be in Elvish, including the subtitles and menu selection screen when you go to a shop or an inn. A nice touch and a good way of showing that we can't understand them within a game while providing more value to pawns since they potentially can. It'd have been cool to have an ability to learn the language ourselves, but I feel that would have diminished the value of pawns having the specialization. Unfortunately for Glyn, the trial of archery is on hold because his sister Darren has been kidnapped by an ogre and their father has gone to save her. We can head to the cave with Glyn to help out, and he performs a long-range shot to hit the ogre's arm so it will let go of his sister and gives us enough time to pick her up and get her out of there. The best part about this quest though is what happens if you beat the ogre first. If you just save Darren, you'll have to escort her all the way out of the cave. However, if you are strong enough to kill the ogre before grabbing her, Glyn will find a shortcut midway through and teleport you all to the entrance, saving you the time. Especially useful on repeat playthroughs when ogres are a joke to kill. The best part is that your reward for this quest is a port crystal, most likely your first one, and I believe that's a deliberate choice as there is no static crystal in the arbor, at least for now. You'll probably want to return here without hoofing it, so the port crystal is perfectly placed within the village. By the time you have completed this quest, you've done almost enough to raise Glyn's affinity to max, but it's probably not quite there yet. Whenever I do these runs, I head back to the village so I can talk to Darren for the first time, as she knows a little English too. I'll preface by saying that I am an anglophone and not bilingual, so I don't know the accuracy of this setup, but Darren understands our language only slightly and isn't experienced in practice, so when she talks to you, she sometimes stumbles over her words or has to think for a brief moment, and the way the voice actor delivered these lines felt authentic to me.
She has been with us a very long time. She is nature's very heart and a pillar of strength for my people.
Darren lets us know that the Arbor Heart, their sacred tree, is dying and the only way to heal it is with a material known as Gwefentia. She doesn't know the English name for it, so she suggests asking someone who might have knowledge on what it actually is. Without pawn knowledge, you have to reason out who you would need to talk to in order to progress this quest. There's no waypoint here. You have to use your brains, guys. Sorry about that. I don't like using mine either. The idea is that you would find the only other elf who speaks English to get the true name of the material, Scale Cinder. And we know of only one other person who does, that being Glyn. But where is he? Well, I don't think it's made clear, but Glyn can often be found at the ruins where you first met him. I wasn't aware of that, but the game tries to naturally guide you, assuming you have talked to the important NPCs in the village. Darren gives us a quest, and if we talk to her father, he wants to get to know us better since we are the Arisen and he is the leader of his own community. He will ask us to escort him to the ruins, so it's a natural means of running into Glyn again and being able to ask him about the Scale Cinder. Plus, this was also where I maxed the affection for both him and his father. You don't need to be a detective to find things in this game. You just need to play like you live in the world, like you were in some sort of role-playing game. Talk to people and see if they have any work for you. Ask around, try to do something else. Eventually you would have run into Glyn anyway because he still makes trips to Vernworth. The point is to not rush yourself. When the game doesn't give you all of the information, it's telling you to take your time. By the way, the dad is the Archermeister, so you can get the ultimate archer skill from him immediately after the escort. Since he likes you so much, it like maxed his affinity entirely. If you want to know where I think they go a bit too far on the take your time design, it's during a quest called A Beggar's Tale, where there is a beggar in the city of Vernworth every day, often telling stories for donations. Someone suggests things aren't as they seem with this guy, and we get the opportunity to tail him. Except this is solely based on the NPC's internal schedule every day, so we don't know when he will leave the center of town, nor where he goes at night. This means that dozing off to progress time could be the wrong call, as he could have disappeared by that point. So what is there to do then? You have to waste your time standing in place while the in-game day progresses. An in-game day is something like 48 real-life minutes, so you're going to be waiting around a while until he finally starts moving. And then when he does move, he ends up at a tavern in the slums and you have to wait there for him again. Then he goes home and locks the door, meaning we have to wait even longer. Waiting and waiting and waiting. And it's not the type where you could go off to do something else because you have to keep your eyes on this guy. When you tail him to the tavern in the slums, we can see that he has a poor Beastren wife. They share a life in poverty together, but when he exits his home, he does so in noble attire. In truth, the dude has been role-playing a beggar in order to make a quick buck because he didn't want to do any actual hard labor. You could find evidence of his misdeeds in his now unlocked home by picking up his beggar's clothes. You then get the opportunity to drop them off to one of two locations. Even weirder, we somehow know where and how to find his other wife, who is also a noble, even though we never followed him to that point. The game assumes that since we have the clothes, we have done everything there is to do and now need to make our choice, but at this point, we only know about the Beastren woman, and on my initial playthrough, that's who I brought this up to because she was the only one I had met and she was being wronged. It's an exhausting experience, a real time waster that doesn't offer anything interesting outside of tailing someone for information, and that could have been handled in a better way and made shorter so as to not overstay. I actually won't spoil the ending of this one for you though. I suggest making whichever choice you think is best so you can see the consequences of your actions. Shadowed Prayers is the start of a couple quests that are interconnected. When you first reach the lands of Battahl, you get to take part in this bandit hunting quest. You meet a young boy and later learn that he's working for bandits. You find their hideout and the boy gets betrayed by the bandit leader and arrested. If you visit the kid in jail, you can pay to have him released and talk to other Coral Snake prisoners about where their leader ran off to. Then you can go kill the leader and the kid will wonder what he should do now. The good ending of that quest seems to be getting him a job as a doorman back at the bordello, as long as you have completed a quest for Wilhelmina. This is a convoluted sequence of events because it is awkwardly tied into Shadowed Prayers. See, when you reach the bandit camp, the first two dudes that attack you seem to be semi-relevant NPCs for quest purposes. I ended up killing them because they were attacking me and then later happened upon their corpses in the Battahl morgue. Yeah, there's a morgue in this game. Important NPCs end up there so that you can resurrect them. It's actually really difficult, if not impossible, to brick a playthrough. I revived the two bandits and then they ended up in prison cells when I met with the kid. I had a jail key, so I released everyone for kicks, and this ended up biting me in the ass later. During Shadowed Prayers, someone has attempted to assassinate High Priestess Nadinia. It's now our job to make sure that they don't get a second chance. We are given a bill of arrest and need to look at the people watching the ceremony to figure out who the would-be assassin is and then grab them. If you fail, Nadinia dies, I assume. I never fail this. I have yet to ever fail this. In a later quest, you need to help determine who is organizing these assassination attempts, and so you need to not only talk to the guy we captured, but also the Kratos-looking bandit we revived and then released from jail. Even my pawns told me to go to the jail to talk to this guy because they assumed I wouldn't be stupid enough to release him. I thought the quest was soft-locked at this point, but luckily I wasn't the only one who had this issue, and online conversations explained how Kratos hangs out in a nearby tavern now despite being a fugitive who broke out of jail. Even the final part of the quest has a few endings depending on how you choose to handle things. Do you put the priestess in danger to catch the ringleader, or do you try a different method? Do you forcibly arrest the leader or try to get more information out of them? There's more depth and interconnectedness to these quests than you may realize on your first playthrough or expect out of a game like this, and it's a rewarding experience to see everything through and see how it concludes. If it concludes anyway. I'm not going to go into detail of all the side quests found in Vermund or Battahl, but I do want to give you a taste of what makes them all so special. Remember that fishing village with the Saurians? If we go to revisit them, they are attacked once again. We can clear them out, and this will be important when another side quest converges with it later on. That side quest is Re-Advent of Calamity. After completing some story quests, we can return to Melve to see it is under attack by a blight dragon. I don't know if these guys have actual terminology or names. This creature is meant to run away after a certain amount of damage, but you can kill it here and now if you are strong enough, and multiple people will comment on this feat, including Ulrika, who now sees that you truly are the Arisen. Later, politics cause Ulrika to get ousted from her home, causing her to move to Harv. We have to save more villagers from the Saurians, and Ulrika will end up in charge of the place afterward. We then have to save the Melve citizens from some soldiers and give them the means to migrate to Harv as well. Two separate quests end up coming together to move an entire village from one end of Vermund to the other, and it's actually important for an aspect of the endgame. Every little quest that you think has no value is more connected than you will initially believe. This is also when you get the Mystic Spear Hand vocation, by the way, just so you know. Talk to that guy. I should be showing a picture of him. It's that guy. Talk to him. There's a timed wolf mission where we have to save a kid before he's eaten, and the game expects you to follow a trail of flower petals rather than a waypoint, and you only know that by talking to the villagers in the checkpoint rest town. There is the Jadeite Orb quest where you are begged to utilize the forgery mechanic and are then punished for doing so. There's a quest for the owner of the bordello, Wilhelmina, but you only get it if you raise her affection enough, and you don't unlock it by talking to her. You need to use a spy hole she showed you previously to eavesdrop on a conversation she is having and then help her murder a guy and then run away from the cops. A cool quest has you finding the second part of a powerful spell book, and you can create a forgery of it to deliver to someone, and doing so saves the life of his family, believe it or not. Continuing the Arbor Heart quest will allow you to save the Sacred Arbor from being doomed in the endgame. A quest where you need to get poisoned lets you get poisoned. Okay, that one kind of sucked. Almost every quest in the game has so much character to it. It sometimes feels like playing Oblivion for the first time all over again. The biggest issue with many of these quests, though, is that they often feel like their story arcs are unfinished. We learn that an orphan girl is the lost twin sister of a noble boy because their parents gave her up, but there's no follow-up to this information. After helping Wilhelmina, she seems to disappear entirely from the game unless I'm missing something. Little things like that happen all the time in the game and often leave you scratching your head because this is the type of game where you could have missed a follow-up quest, but I find that is rarely the case. That doesn't mean all quests are like this, of course, but it's enough that people have started to observe and complain about it. And on the topic of Wilhelmina, the game has an affection system, as I mentioned, for every NPC in the game. If the affection is high enough, the characters start to blush, and if you own a home in one of the cities, they will start to leave gifts for you as well as other small features. You would think that would be it then, but there's more to it, and it's a little weird. There are technically two romance scenes in the game. One involves Wilhelmina and the other involves Ulrika. By completing Ulrika's questline, or the single quest for Wilhelmina, both characters will present you with a scene that, while fading to black, implies that you slept together. There's no option to turn them down, and there's no other scenes like this for any of the male characters, which I found odd. Listen, I'm not a prude, right? Romance scenes are almost expected in a game like this nowadays, but to sort of force it onto the character without any warning can be immersion breaking in terms of the player's headcanon. This is a role-playing game after all. A lot of players would not have their Arisen sleep with multiple people, or even these two people. The ability to turn them down would have gone a long way here, and the inclusion of additional similar scenes for male characters would have led to a more inclusive experience. class, just something I noticed. So you've completed the Vermund story quests, you're completing side quests in Vermund and maybe in Battahl, but it's time to really push through and see what Act 2 of the story is, only to realize that there isn't really an Act 2 to be found. Brant gives us papers that will allow us passage through the checkpoint gate, but it requires being a beastren. Luckily, you can buy a mask in the rest town if your Arisen is human. Alternatively, you can use the side paths I mentioned earlier, or if you're really clever, sneak into the back of the fancy carriages that are constantly going through. There's even an achievement for you if you do it that way. The region of Battahl doesn't just look different in comparison to Vermund, it's mechanically different as well. A much more vertical area to explore, expecting you to find ways to scale cliff sides, to cross huge gaps, and generally have a hard time finding your way around. To help remedy this, there is a sky train system set up that allows you to more easily move from location to location. However, there are still dangers of harpies destroying the carriage and sending you plummeting to your death. It's refreshing to be in a completely new location with its own challenges to overcome. You have to think about exploration differently than how you did in Vermund and acclimate to your new surroundings. But enemies are more difficult here and seem to be in greater numbers, which is an issue when Vermund was already feeling overpopulated in the combat department. Since we're here now, let's talk about a couple more vocations. Mystic Spearhand is unlocked in Vermund, but you receive the Meister ability for it in Battahl. This is by far my favorite class in the game as of my third playthrough. I think it strikes one of the best balances between damage and flair. Nothing feels overly powerful, and everything is effective in its own way. You get a timed counter ability, a gap closing ability that can be used to actually cross gaps, a passive shield ability for your whole party, and more. It feels like a class that has it all in one way or another. Crowd control and damage, and a big part of that is thanks to its inherent skill, Redoubted Bolt, which you can use to briefly stun enemies, allowing you to pick them up and toss them or leave them open for another attack. The ability can be charged to create a Foreboding Bolt, which slows enemies for a time, and you can press the Bolt button just as Foreboding hits its target to spread the stun to other nearby enemies. If they're small enough, any of these enemies could be picked up at the same time using an ability like Devout to Fringe, letting you wipe out an entire party of goblins by throwing them all off of a cliff at once. In the previous game, there were a few ways to scale vertically. Mage still has Levitate, but Strider used to have a double jump. Now the Thief has a wall jump instead, which I find awkward to use, but you can triangle jump with it if you try hard enough. Mystic Spearhand has an equipable skill that allows them to move more freely, and this can be great for getting to locations that you previously thought inaccessible, especially if you thought the only way to do so was Levitate. Better yet, unlock Warfarer and switch between Mage and Mystic Spearhand to get anywhere with ease. Mystic Spearhand is one of the most interesting and liberating classes, and the Meister ability is one of the flashier skills to boot, allowing you to continuously attack a group of enemies with an after image of yourself at the cost of continual stamina loss. You get this skill by heading to the southeast of Battahl, where you end up in a forest full of petrified people and monsters. Sure enough, this is close to the lair of Medusa, but it is not the goal if you are searching for the Meister ability. Instead, you have to go past Medusa, up this large mountain to an even larger tower, and there you find the second dragon that attacked Melv, with the Mystic Spearhand Meister Sigurd showing up as well to back you. You fight your way up to the top, kill the dragon, and receive your reward with the new ability and a stronger bond with Sigurd, though this guy really never sees any development at all. Now Trickster, that's the most bullshit class in the game. I have never had less fun than playing this class because it is the antithesis to what the game expects of you in combat. Pawns are there to aid you, and they can be intelligent in some ways, but rarely if ever is a pawn intelligent enough to effectively kill a large creature unless they are shooting meteors out of the sky to do so. Especially when fighting something like a golem where you are forced to hit specific weak points. It's probably the weakest aspect of combat overall, so why they decided to make a class that completely focuses on this concept, I'll never understand. Trickster does not deal damage. Well, virtually none. It's not supposed to. In fact, its strength and magic stats don't affect damage, but affect other aspects of the class like your little summon you can make. The concept of the class focuses on the familiar you can summon, a misty copy of yourself that is meant to draw the ire of enemies surrounding you. If you create your mirror image and blast enemies with mist, they'll be incensed and begin focusing on the double instead of your party. To make this more useful, you can then attach the double to an enemy so that the creatures then attack each other. This is almost a necessity to make sure you don't get overwhelmed immediately by the enemy. And as you get used to the class, you start to move the double around, summoning it behind you and placing it back down to prevent it from taking damage because it does have a health bar. I often found myself distracting enemies and moving my double just before the enemy strikes, allowing me to kite them around while my pawns did the heavy lifting, but it's still a much longer and more grating process than if you could just deal damage yourself, and I don't believe it's any easier a class like it was marketed to be. If anything, it's more difficult because of how obtuse it is. So what's the point of it? To be unique? That's a cool idea, but the execution didn't hit home. What you get instead of a unique experience designed around changing the tide of battle is a frustrating one where everything targets you before you get a chance to have your summon out, so you have to run away for half the fight to get them out and then try to control the battle from there. Eventually you unlock a skill that temporarily boosts the stats of your party while eating away at their HP. And I don't know if this was a placebo effect, but they seem to become so powerful by using this ability, I stopped caring about anything else. This is the vocation we got instead of Assassin, instead of Ranger, instead of Mystic Knight. This? Pawns are at their best when they are fighting alongside me. By themselves, they could be classified as toddlers fighting a semi-truck. Okay, I mentioned Medusa, right? Next to the Sphinx, Medusa is probably my favorite series of mechanics in the game. Sure, we lost petrification for spellcasters, but we received a unique petrification item that we can use at our leisure, until it shrivels up and dies. There's a cave where you can find Medusa. Unfortunately, there's only one on the map, but it does respawn. The thing about the Medusa fight is not the fight itself, but what happens if you target her weak point. By focusing slashing damage on her head, you can eventually cut it off, ending the battle early. You'll get a basic Medusa head for doing this, and you can equip the head to your belt in order to petrify enemies at will. This is super useful for a quest where a man wants you to fight a griffin so that he can make a statue of the creature. If you petrify it, he can make the best statue possible. But there's more to it than that. If you cut the head off of the Medusa while she is near full HP, you get a higher tier, fresher head that has more petrification fuel, I guess, meaning you can use it more often before it runs out. Just like any other biological item in the game, the Medusa head can rot, so we need to keep it stored or use it soon so that it doesn't lose its power. You can even use the head of Medusa to petrify another Medusa after it respawns, or you can use that mirror shield from the vaults in Vermund to reflect her own beam back at her, and it actually works, and it actually petrifies her. And the fact that they put that much effort into making sure all of these mechanics work is astounding, especially considering there is no quest to lead you directly to Medusa necessarily. There's technically the Griffin quest. Full trust has to be put into the player to maybe see this mechanic, and there aren't a lot of developers willing to risk the work to put into cool features if there is a chance that they won't be seen. It's not just Medusa. You can petrify a griffin, a drake, a dragon, anything. I saw a dude on TikTok petrify the final boss. I saw the same dude petrify Talos. You can petrify a dude that is already a statue and end the fight super early, completely locking you out of a certain cutscene in the endgame, but earning you an achievement in the process. The world is your oyster. I cannot express how incredible the options here are. Every time you think to yourself, oh, that probably won't work, something does. Do you understand how powerful that is? The imagination and skill you need to have to make all of that work. The courage to allow players to do that. It's an incredible feat of game design and direction, and one that more games need to take notice of. Anytime something could happen, the devs had the follow-through to make the conclusion possible.
Oh, it is finished. The result is even more sublime than I'd hoped. I must deliver it to Lord Faces at once. Though, mayhap. Now, I cannot leave this in your hands. I may not be fleet of foot, but only I can do this.
I keep alluding to it, but we are basically at the end of the game when we reach Battahl. You need to meet with a man named Ambrosia who asks you to find him crystals so that he can make a god sway. This leads you back to Harva village where you meet with a crazy fisherman who also happens to be an Arisen. In fact, Many of the characters you meet in the game are ex-Arisen who failed to defeat the dragon, but didn't die in the process. Now they have lost their right to the title and live their lives like normal. The Fisherman, Sigurd, the Trickster Lady, the Dragon Forge, the Warfarer Meister, and I think the Magic Archer, all are ex-Arisen, and yes, there is a Dragon Forge for all of you who remember the NPC from the first game. In the Dark Arisen expansion, I assumed Bitterblack Isle was a congregation of worlds for Arisen to arrive in, but that may not be the case. It's more likely now that there are just previous Arisen who failed their duty, but in such a way that they remained human. In order to find out about the Fisherman Arisen, we need to visit a nearby cave that is housing this game's Dragon Forged. For those not in the know, the Dragon Forged was a character from the first game and very important to the lore heads out there because he divulged much about the world. That is not the case here. There is very little conversation to be had with the Dragon Forged of Dragon's Dogma 2, and I have no idea why. It's like the game is actively trying to prevent you from learning anything or forming worthwhile questions to theorize over. The only questions you get are those born out of utter confusion. The only use this guy has now on your initial playthrough before the end game is that he is now the mechanic for dragon forging your gear. In the previous games, you would have a percentage chance of your gear being dragon forged after defeating worms, drakes, etc. This percentage chance was based on how far you upgraded the gear currently, because this is technically the fourth final tier of upgrades. Defeating Grigori, or the online version of the Dragon Raid, look it up, would guarantee any gear you're wearing would be dragon forged regardless of what tier it was currently at. Now the chance-based aspect of that has been removed entirely. When killing dragons, they will drop Worm's Life crystals, and these can be used as a currency to dragon forge gear. You are now forced to fully upgrade the gear first, but the dragon forging is always guaranteed, so I think it's a fine trade-off. It's balanced. Worm's Life crystals have a lot of uses once you hit endgame and New Game Plus, but for now that's all they are good for. It's very important to dragon forge your gear because the stat raises for that final tier are better than any other upgrade you got previously, and it halves the current weight of the equipment for you. So the Dragon Forged has his mechanical uses, sure, but that's it really. You're not going to be getting much more out of him now, at least until the endgame when the exposition dumps start happening. So we talk to the Dragon Forged and to the Trickster woman and then finally to the Fisherman guy, and for some reason talking to him raises an entire shrine from the sea that we can now access through those Saurian caves we've been to at least twice now. And what do we find within? A room reminiscent of the Everfall from the first game with the ghost of a past Arisen sitting before us. We went from a political struggle beginner plotline straight into the big reveal Force Ghost dude that founded Vermund. Rotheus here elaborates on what the crystals that make the Godsway are, the fractured souls of previous Arisen. He also believes you to be working with someone known as the Watching One, but soon realizes that this isn't the case. Within you, Rotheus senses a strong will, and despite not knowing your intent, he decides to bestow upon you his own soul in the form of his Godsbane. For newer players, a Godsbane is received when the Arisen defeats the dragon and gets their heart back. It is then used later on during a final scene of sorts that allows a player to finalize the end of the game. It is the only means of killing the Seneschal and is meant to be used by the Arisen when they take up the throne of the Seneschal so that they can truly die. And again, if you're new, I bet that was really confusing for you, right? You probably beat the entire game and have no idea what a Seneschal is. Understandable if you didn't play the first game. In the original, defeating the dragon is not the end. Once defeated, the world state changes and a giant hole to a location known as the Everfall comes out of the ground, destroying a huge chunk of Grand Soren in the process. The Arisen is destined to travel to the Everfall and use 20 or so wake stones to open a special door that puts them in front of the Seneschal. The Seneschal is effectively the god of the world moving forward and is meant to be usurped by the next Arisen per cycle should they succeed in defeating their dragon. If successful, you take the Seneschal's Godsbane and stab them with it, as it is the only way to truly kill them and let them rest. If you fail to defeat the Seneschal, you become the next dragon and the cycle repeats. Even as the Seneschal, the cycle repeats. The worlds of Dragon's Dogma are on a loop to prevent some form of oblivion that is explained further in the endgame of the sequel. However, the Arisen in the first game can attempt to end the cycle by using their own god sway on themselves. While not mentioned in the English localization, Rotheus here is most likely a seneschal. You find him in a room that is visually similar to the Everfall, and he is sitting in nearly the same throne that the seneschal does in the original game. Thanks to a buddy of mine, King Bendrick, a content creator who sent me a link to some localization analysis, we now know that Rotheus actually refers to himself as becoming the seneschal. We are somehow encountering the man we are meant to succeed almost immediately after leaving Vermund from a storyline perspective. I'll have a link to the analysis in the description. Do you understand how insane that omission is for us playing in English? The topic of the Seneschal is a huge lore point that has critical ties to the world of the first game. To not even properly mention it in the second game is borderline criminal, and I'm unsure why this happened. Maybe to avoid confusion, but then the story is more confusing for newer players regardless because they shove all of the lore at the end of the game instead of building it up gradually throughout the entire playthrough, and omit parts of the story that lead you to a fuller picture of the events at hand. So the Seneschal of this world is bestowing upon us their own Godsbane, which would normally be used to end their life, but the rules are a little different at the moment. For one, we found the Seneschal without much fuss, and we also have a dulled/broken Godsbane for whatever reason. Things are not one-to-one as they were in the original game, but there are parallels. These are huge implications moving forward. I don't think he even explains this until the secret endgame, which has a requirement to access. I'd be surprised if any new players were able to figure it out naturally. So we leave Vermund, meet the Seneschal of all people, and bring the Godsbane to the man Ambrosius because he has the ability to fix it, all in the span of a day. And then we go to collect the finished relic, only for Ambrosius to want to deliver it to the man Phasis, who is on his way to the excavation site from the start of the game, so that he can attempt to do something with it. We sort of know who Phasis is at this point. He gets mentioned in a couple side quests, we see him traveling as we enter Battahl, and we have the opportunity to meet with him during the masquerade back in Vernworth. He seems to be in a romantic relationship with the Queen Regent and has been colluding with her to help with her plans surrounding the fake Arisen, but there's more to him than that. He's a magical researcher in Battahl and has been looking for a means to control the dragon so that he could cause a schism within the cycle and potentially put a stop to it. Using the god sways that have been created to control pawns, he hopes to head to Moonglint Tower and use a powerful scepter he has created in order to bring the dragon down to do his bidding so that he may unmake the Dogma of Dragons. He actually says it. What that dogma isn't currently clear within this particular storyline. However, the delivery of the Godsbane is the weirdest plot point for me because Phasis is already heading to the excavation site to move forward with his plan when we receive the item, so bringing him the Godsbane is of no use. Why bother? From Ambrosius's point of view, there should be no reason, other than the fact that he seems obsessed with the power he can infer from the relic. When the Pathfinder takes control of Ambrosius's mind and tells him to give us the Godsbane, he tasks us with making the delivery in his stead, so that might be a bit confusing at first. You may wonder why you are delivering the Godsbane to the villain. In truth, this is just a bit of a miscommunication. Really, the Pathfinder is asking us to bring the Godsbane to Moonglint Tower, so that we may reach the conclusion of our own journey. They say as much when we get it. The reason we were even here was due to the directions of the Pathfinder, as if their entire goal was to bring us into connection with the Godsbane so that we could have it reforged and use it at some point, but on who? Rotheus mentions how the Watching One was after him. In a way, the Pathfinder is a witness to everything happening in the world. Could it be that Rotheus broke his Godsbane to prevent his death as a Seneschal, and the Pathfinder wanted it reconstructed so that we could kill him? Who's to say? That's just an interpretation. It's also a key which allows you to get into the tower, so the Pathfinder may have thought it was just necessary for you to have the key. I don't know. So we have the Godsbane and we need to deliver it to chase after Phasis. But as we do, a giant living statue known as Talos rises from the sea and seems to also be chasing after the Battahl party on the way to the excavation site. This entire section with Talos can be a bit confusing and it's way more involved than you may realize. Once you get your hands on the completed God's Bane, you are now on a timer despite the quest not having the hourglass icon beside its name. This lack of communication can be a frustrating choice because you'll realize via the quest marker that you are supposed to begin making your way to the volcanic region. Because I hadn't been there yet, I wanted to try getting there the optional way first so I could see where that led. You end up going through these deep mazes of collapsed pathways within a cliffside while being accosted by goblins the entire journey. The issue is that I spent so much time trying to reach this alternate route that when I finally made it there, all of the sudden Talos sprang out of the ocean and began heading towards the tower. The entire Talos section does not require you to be in the vicinity. The game will handle the entire scene without your intervention, and that's really cool. You could watch Talos from a distance and just see where he ends up without you doing anything, and I appreciate that option. But this is a game where scaling giant enemies is the best part. So of course I want to scale the largest enemy in the game, and it's really annoying to me when a game that informs me of other quests being timed doesn't do the same for this super important one-time quest that features one of the coolest experiences so far. I ended up having to revert to an older inn save so that I could restart the quest and head through the closed door onto the proper path that Talos would be walking alongside. And if you do things that way, Talos will appear earlier because there's a trigger as you make your way down to the water. If they were going to have a trigger there anyway, why add the timer? Well, I think the timer is actually justified, I just wish it was communicated better. Phases and his group are already heading towards the tower. If we took the alternate route, we could still reach them. The game wants to make sure that Talos shows up for you before you potentially make it over there. But then, what if we have already been there way earlier and placed a port crystal down at the final destination? What happens then? I don't have an answer. I'll have to try that on my third or fourth playthrough because now I'm curious. So Talos springs up from the ground and we are tasked with defeating it before it can reach the tower, but why? I see a lot of confusion surrounding the motivation of our party here since Phases is the enemy. There is an explanation though. Talos is a force of nature. He has a goal of making it to the tower and it doesn't matter who dies along the way. Camps can get destroyed, people crushed, cliff sides ruined, etc. It's like a giant tornado sweeping through a town because the tornado is super pissed at one guy. When you talk to the fisherman Arisen who saw the seafloor shrine rise alongside us, he tells us a story about Talos and about how Talos is a servant of the brine. The mechanical concept from the first game meant to give reason for why our characters cannot swim now seems to have actual intent and a purpose within the story. Talos was created by the brine to monitor the dragon and ensure it commits no acts of excess. But what is the excess that is being committed here? It's not particularly clear, but just the idea that Phases is attempting to take control of a being so crucial to the cycle, the brine may see this as a threat. So it's not that we are trying to save Phases, but that we feel compelled to stop Talos out of a responsibility to the innocent people that are going to get hurt in its wake. If you really wanted to, you could just let Talos make it to the tower without intervention, and the game does have a conclusion for that. In fact, there are many conclusions for Talos and it leads to it being one of the more interesting boss encounters in the entire game. If you ever made allusions to Shadows of the Colossus when explaining the appeal of Dragon's Dogma, this is the epitome of that mindset. Talos is completely scalable, and if a melee character especially, you are expected to climb all over him, taking out various weak points in an attempt to slow him down and stop him. It's a mixture of fighting a Colossus while also feeling as though we are back in Monster Hunter Freedom Unite, trying to stop Lao Shan Lung or Shen Gao Ren, with bridges placed to better help you reach the top of the creature, and ballistas scattered around for extra damage. Removing these weak points are not enough to fully stop Talos. You still need to perform damage by other means, and depending on how long this takes you, a variety of things can happen. If you don't stop Talos, he will reach a pool of lava and end up dying anyway, which sounds like stopping him doesn't matter, but hold on, there are endgame consequences for having this happen. If you are too slow to stop it, the creature will lose an arm during the fight, and this will also affect the endgame later on. Kill him early enough and he will keep his arm for later. Use Medusa's head to petrify him and he will crumble almost immediately once the fight begins. Use an unmaking arrow on him to basically one-shot him, and then just wait at a nearby ballista for him to approach the shore and be forced to stop. There's so many different ways you can handle this fight. There's even a unique cutscene if you manage to reach him before he breaks a nearby bridge, allowing you to get a better view of the event taking place. The developers thought of every possible scenario when it comes to the mechanics they offer you, and the payoff is retrying the fight and seeing the different ways you can affect the conclusion and what that conclusion will mean moving forward. The fight itself is daunting. This isn't a game like Monster Hunter where you survive a fall from any height. If you aren't keeping track of your stamina and find stable ground on top of the Colossus, there's a very real chance you could fall to your death if you didn't bring any wake stones with you. It's a fight where you really want to be prepared for it, so again, I am surprised they made it a timed event without properly conveying that to the player through the normal means of showing an hourglass icon in the quest list. It's a fantastic experience regardless. The thrill of climbing such a gigantic beast of a boss, the idea that you have the ability to stop him in his tracks at any point along its desired path if you find the means, the thrill of jumping off the creature onto the cliffside so that you can hit it with a ballista, the fear that you could fall off at any moment and plummet to your death. It's a rush that the game has yet to offer us. It's a sense of wonder, as I mentioned before. The wonder of fighting Talos is one of the main appeals of Dragon's Dogma's design. The wonder of fighting Medusa and cutting off her head, the wonder of fighting a dragon in the tower and killing it while looking out at the lands below. Dragon's Dogma loves presenting you with situations that make you vocally shout, "Wow," as you experience them. Once you finally manage to stop Talos, you'll find that you are now within the final region of the game, a volcanic region that has one real village to explore, plus the slave camp that we started the game in. If you made it to the volcanic region by using the large dungeon I mentioned earlier, you are pretty close to a hut housing the Meister for the Magic Archer vocation. You are free to explore once Talos is defeated, so don't feel like you are still timed. I recommend stopping by this hut and finding a nearby dwarf with a bad back who needs help getting back to his home. When you arrive with him, you'll see that his partner is an elf woman who is disturbed by our presence there. The dwarf man wants to head to the healing springs in the nearby village, but can't manage on his own. If you agree to help and escort him there, the elf woman follows you and you'll unlock Magic Archer in the process. Coincidentally, right beside the hot springs is a man you can feed a special alcohol known as Newt Liqueur to. By giving him enough and periodically conversing with him, he will unlock the final vocation for you, that being Warfarer. Listen, anything I said about Magic Archer in the past, I was wrong. This class has to be the strongest in the game, with the capability of one-shotting any creature you are presented with thanks to the Meister ability. By not only spending your current health but the fatigue as well, you can shoot out a damage over time ability that just eats away at the boss regardless of how much health they have. The more max health you consume, the more damage you deal, so make sure to carry a lot of wake stones and all heal elixirs if you want to make good use of this ability on your journey. It almost feels like a gimmick class because of this one skill, but that's not really fair. Magic Archer has a lot of utility. It has the ability to heal allies, and plenty of archer adjacent spells that can help turn the tide of battle, like the damage over time from Frost Hunter Bolt or the Ricochet Hunter attack that allows a series of attacks to bounce off walls for additional damage. You can even attach an orb of fire damage to an enemy that will run around with it, dealing damage to other creatures as well. It's a powerful class when used well, although I mostly only ever saw it as a one-shot cheese vocation so that I could farm experience and items. Still, I remember having less than stellar opinions about Magic Archer in the original game, though people were quick to point out its ability to absolutely destroy when given the opportunity. Now it feels easier than ever to be useful with the vocation while also having utility alongside it, but it still wasn't a vocation I enjoyed using as actively as Mystic Spearhand, for example. My biggest issue is that the vocation seems to suffer similar to how Mage and Sorcerer were described, missing skills that had no reason to be removed and not properly making up for their loss. Warfarer, meanwhile, was one of the more interesting classes in the game despite it losing an active ability in battle, plus having no decent Meister ability. Warfarer is a unique vocation in that you can equip weapons from every vocation at once. The problem is that your Meister ability that lets you switch between them is required to be equipped in order to do this. If you don't, you'll only be able to equip one weapon, but you would then also be able to equip 4 skills for that weapon instead of 3. As a way of not overloading the character, Warfarer only counts the heaviest of all the weapons you have equipped. So what's great about the vocation? Namely that you can swap between weapons, and by doing so you are switching up your core skills, making your character more versatile. You could use Mystic Spear Hand to cross a large gap and then switch to Mage to utilize the Levitate ability so that you could climb up a cliff. And even better, your discipline points don't just rank up Warfarer, but also slowly rank up every other vocation you have, meaning you can get a head start on some of them by maxing out Warfarer first. The problem arises when you look at the limitations. Sure, you can have every weapon equipped and cycle through them, but cycling is a tedious process the more weapons you have. Imagine you have a list of weapons and you had to work your way down the list in a single direction before looping back to the start, and every time you switch those weapons out, it costs you stamina to do so. And then the equipped skills you have currently stay the same regardless of what weapons you have equipped, so many of them are disabled until you switch back, meaning half the time the skills may be useless depending on which weapon you are using, or the weapon may feel useless because you have no skills to utilize with it. I feel like there was an easy fix for this. Let the user set up 3 skills per weapon, and when they switch to the weapon they get to use those skills. It'd be more tedious, but it would at least make every weapon viable. But maybe that's a balancing issue. Maybe creating a class where a character can use every weapon and every skill plus core skills is a bit too busted. Understandable. Then at the very least, could we meet in the middle and not disable abilities when another weapon is equipped? Instead, we could activate the ability and switch to the weapon automatically at a higher stamina cost, thus saving us from having to cycle through everything. Without these options, Warfarer seems like a cool concept, but feels more clunky than it does enjoyable. I don't want to spend half of my stamina switching to a weapon that I have my skills on, so I end up not wanting to equip all of the weapons. If I only have a few weapons equipped, I could pick a skill per weapon and have less to cycle through, which feels like it goes against the point of the vocation somewhat. By this point in the game, you are ready to head to the end, but the Volcanic region does have some quests of its own, such as helping the Magic Archer and Warfarer. There's new enemies and materials to find as well, but other than that, this area feels heavily underutilized in comparison to somewhere like Battahl or Vermund. It does have the hot springs though, which can be used to hang out with your high affinity NPCs or even remove battle scars that appear on your character or your pawn. I didn't even know that happened until like a couple days ago. So there's that, I guess. Otherwise, I didn't find much use out of the new location other than buying some new gear, since the shop had more powerful options than Battahl. If you wanted to backtrack and clear out any remaining side quests, now is the time, because as I mentioned, we are on a crash course for the end of the game and the train isn't stopping during this video. Once we manage to reach the slave encampment, where pawns have been put to work, we can see Phases and his entourage make their way up Moonglint Tower while knocking a staircase out. Luckily, there's an elevator we can activate using the God's Bane, which takes us up enough to run into Ragnall. Don't know who Ragnall is? Don't remember him being here? Well, he'll only show up if you complete a specific side quest, and it's meant to act as a reward for forming a sort of rivalry with him. When you first reach Battahl, a Beastren man will be unhappy to see that you have pawns in tow, as the Beastren are prejudiced against pawns, and this is hardly elaborated on in the game's main story alongside the Lambent Flame and all of their religious backstory. You get accosted, but Ragnall comes to your aid, suggesting a 1v1 on Rust style duel. After you win or lose against the assailant, Ragnall will mention how he's a mercenary and hopes to run into you again. Later, you can escort a carriage that is housing an ally to your political cause against the Queen. However, this turns out to be a trap, as the men guarding the carriage are trying to murder the individual and then blame you for the crime. Ragnall shows up, and if you choose to side with him, he explains all of this to you once the guards have been defeated. You then tag along with him for a bit through a nearby cave before he gets trapped behind a cave-in and has to find another way out. If you take part in this series of events, Ragnall will be there to greet you within Moonglint Tower. Bored of the simplistic mercenary life he leads, he wants to have a duel to the death with you to feel truly alive. I love that this could be a scenario that doesn't happen for some people, and that they have no clue about it until someone tells them otherwise. That water cooler discussion aspect of the game is what can make sharing your experiences with others so appealing. You both may have finished the game, but you both learn something new in the process of discussing it. Even the fight has multiple outcomes. If you defeat Ragnall by throwing him off the edge of the bridge you fight him on, I believe he survives and you get a cutscene at the end of the game that implies as much. Alternatively, you could just kill him in normal combat, which I assume would lead to the cutscene not playing. I love to go the extra mile here though. Since Ragnall is an important NPC, even after his death here, we can use a wake stone to revive him, and he'll mention how we bested him before taking a seat to catch his breath, allowing us to move on. Little things like that within a single interaction are what make the game so special. Everyone's interaction with Ragnar has the chance to be different in multiple different encounters, leading to a truly unique experience.
Your efforts are for naught, Arisen. Now, simply watch as this world's hollow and fruitless order is remade by my hand. The ritual is complete. The dragon comes. Behold! The Royce Dragon! By my power, the Dogma of Dragons is unmade.
He said it! He said it!
The end of the game is weird. It feels like it took no time at all to get here, and it continues to feel rushed once we arrive. The latter part might be intentional, at least. While the original game had this cinematic fight against Grigori spanning over several set pieces, we are not so lucky within the end of the sequel. With Ragnar defeated, we make our way up Moonglint Tower, only for Phases and his entourage there to greet us, including the false sovereign we were investigating earlier. I assume he is here so that he can claim he bested the dragon, giving him legitimacy as this world's Arisen. And while it seems as though Phases is just a lackey of the Queen, this couldn't be further from the truth. Rather, it seems his alliance with the Queen may have been an emotional one or a means to an end. His real goal, as he explains to us after the battle, is to take control of the pieces that define the cycle and reshape the world in a way that isn't the creation of some higher being or higher purpose. Phases specifically talks about the dogma of dragons being unmade, the destruction of the cycle. No need for the dragon or the Arisen. Phases wants the world to be built by the people living within it, rather than a predetermined fate created by a god. The world has order within the cycle, but within the cycle is constant destruction and rebuilding. Phases sees the dragon's existence as the catalyst for this order and wishes to free everyone by taking control of the dragon and defying the cycle. Based? Phases kind of based? If it weren't for all of the slavery and murder and cursing and whatnot, he might not be so bad. Unfortunately for Phases, it's all for naught because the dragon he summons is just one of the miniature ones we've dealt with already, what I call a blight dragon. Sure enough, mirroring his appearance in the first game, the true dragon swoops down and crushes the imposter among us, burning it alive, with Phases forced to witness and realize that everything he did was for naught. It is not by Phases' hand that the cycle could be defeated. The dragon showing up now is meant as a way to show Phases how foolhardy he was, to show how much strength the dragon has and embarrass Phases for being so conceited, similar to the cult leader from the first game. The dragon loves belittling individuals that it feels are beneath him. I still wouldn't be surprised if this was Grigori at this point. And to continue mirroring the first game, a different world in a previous cycle, the dragon shows us that he has captured our beloved, the individual with the highest affection at the time, or one of the highest affection individuals who last had their affection value changed. This could be almost any NPC in the game, but for me it was Ulrika. This concept of the game is simple, and I go through it in my original retrospective in more detail, but the dragon is giving you a choice. Do you stand and fight to earn your heart back and potentially die in the process, or do you sacrifice your love to the dragon as a magical contract that will earn you fame and fortune in the land of Vermund as the sovereign? The choice is yours, but as we know with characters like the Dragon Forged, you could fight the dragon and lose as well. If you survive, you just stop being the Arisen. This is the end of the base game, and it feels like we got here at no time at all. I was sure that when I received the God's Bane and the Pathfinder told me I was near the end of the game that there was going to be something else to do, but no, this is it. You either sacrifice Ulrika here or you fight the dragon, and while the fight with the dragon in the first game was a series of set pieces, that is not the case here. Instead, we have one scene of us flying on the dragon's back, and then the next is us fighting in an arena similar to the first game. You may still be wondering why Talos was coming to the tower to deal with the dragon. Well, this is where the lore begins to get even more interesting, at least. The Dogma of Dragons suggests that the dragon is destruction, the end of the cycle before it loops back into the beginning, but as we ride on his back, the dragon mentions how we wish to dismantle the world's will just as he does, potentially more of a nod to the players that went through the original game and attempted to end the cycle before. In this way, the dragon feels as though you are on the same side because he can sense your will but understands that the cycle demands you fight and that this will be the conclusion you are most likely led to. Despite wanting this, the dragon still warns us of what would happen should the cycle be broken. The world would change in a drastic way, becoming a world of chaos and suffering. He makes a very important statement here. Consider, Arisen, how it is thou came to be here. How have the once closed paths before thee come to be cleared? He's referring to the God's Bane, which has acted as a key, opening specific doors or activating specific elevators that allowed us to make it to Moonglint Tower. This is the only hint you get that the God's Bane could be used to end the cycle. And I wonder how many players that didn't play the original game reasoned this out, since I doubt you'd even understand the purpose of the weapon by this point. The dragon almost needs to give you some form of direction with it, allude to its use here in order to reach the true ending. The dragon knows you have the will to end the cycle because he can sense it. Will is all-powerful within the world of Dragon's Dogma, but the dragon isn't all-knowing and is unsure how this will end. Will you slay him? Will he slay you? Will there be another ending? Are you willing to defeat fate even if the cost is the end of the world as you know it? The battle comes and goes in the blink of an eye. You end up in the arena and it's like fighting a drake or dragon from around Vermund but bigger. You also get access to a few ballista, and the dragon will even comment on you using them when you shoot him out of the sky, causing the rest of the battle to be a grounded affair. Even while dying, the dragon states that while this is all preordained, we have the will to put an end to the cycle. So what is to happen then? In the original game, this would be where the world begins to crumble slightly. The Everfall should open, allowing the Arisen to make his way to the Seneschal with time, and then we can decide from there what we do about the cycle, right? No, we're in the end credits now and are the sovereign of Vermund. No talk about the current state of the world, the Everfall, or anything of the sort. No word on what happened to the Queen Regent, or Sven, or anyone. It's a bad end, and if you take a seat on the throne and wait for the credits to roll, you'll earn an achievement due to becoming the ruler of Vermund. You're then taken back to the main menu and can pick up from your last in-save, meaning you can go take part in all of those battles again and find the dragon again if you wish. But luckily, you don't have to repeat all of that. The Pathfinder is within the chamber during the final scene, and you can converse with them. The Pathfinder will wonder why you pursue them, wonder why you have doubt in your mind now that everything is complete. It seems like nothing wrong happened at the end of the fight. We are simply ruling the land now, but something is amiss. We are unhappy with how things transpired, with how the cycle continues, and so the Pathfinder offers to show us what could have been, offers to send us back to see with our own eyes what would happen if we went against the reality created by the Great Will. Our reality is the creation of some god, and we need to understand our folly in trying to break out of it. And just like that, the Pathfinder has set us back on the dragon before we had killed it, and this is now our second opportunity to change the script and reach a different conclusion. By reaching the heart of the dragon and taking out the God's Bane, the ultimate weapon meant to kill a seneschal and lay them to rest, we can plunge the blade into our own chest, which seems to cause a chain reaction with the dragon, causing both of us to plummet into the ocean below. And what is waiting for us in the ocean? The brine. And what is the brine? A tool of the Great Will, unhappy with our choice of us giving up on the cycle, halting the progression of fate. We awaken in a sort of limbo with the Pathfinder there to greet us, explaining how we strayed from our fated path, from the world that we belong to. Now that you have witnessed what could happen, the Pathfinder wishes to send you back, and creates their children from the brine, people that resemble your friends from the world you progress through. The Pathfinder seems to hold some control over the brine, similar to how the brine holds control over Talos. The Pathfinder and the brine may be one and the same. all seem to be tools of the godlike being known as the Great Will, and I want you to really remember what these people look like. Remember how these NPCs look, with eyes similar to the Dragonsplague, but without being pawns, because this will be important in future playthroughs, believe it or not. We refuse to go back, and so the Pathfinder decides to show us what the world is like without the power of the cycle. We wake up in a desecrated land, with the sky red and full of clouds and lightning, and as we look up, we get the hardest title drop of all time. We were just playing Dragon's Dogma before. Now Dragon's Dogma 2 has finally begun. Welcome to the World Unmoored, a world that seems to have been taken over by the power of the brine. So was the brine a creation of the Great Will, or was it kept in check thanks to the power of the cycle? That's right guys, there's finally more to brine lore. The entire game comes back to the brine of all things. The Pathfinder tells us that the consequences of our apathy for refusing to carry on our purpose has caused the world to end up this way, as if all the worlds were fated to be like this if not for the cycle. Like Kreia says in Knights of the Old Republic 2, apathy is death, and we have allowed death to creep back into our existence. The Pathfinder suggests that the world is no longer in the eyes of those who would witness it, and if the world is unworthy of being chronicled, it will soon cease to exist. We are to go explore and see the folly of our actions, and in time, learn that the cycle is necessary. The Pathfinder is punishing us and trying to teach us a lesson, but things aren't going to go as planned. This is the endgame of Dragon's Dogma 2, and I've seen a lot of contention surrounding it online since it started to be found. If you ask me, I think this is a much more interesting endgame to explore than the Everfall, which felt like a series of boss fights through the same dungeon over and over again, where I was tasked with fetching as many wake stones as possible. This new world is more dire, and there is more to explore, because all the water of the land has dried up and flown into the sky. Now all the oceans are fully explorable. Areas where there were now ponds are now craters with ruins to be found. There's new and updated enemies to fight, and rare gear to be found from chests that were not accessible in the past. The shift of the world was so great that it can feel like you are exploring somewhere completely different, and that's refreshing. What people don't like is that they are on some sort of pseudo-timer. The mechanics work like this. We are watching the world slowly be consumed by the brine. There are pillars of light that contain boss fights to take part in, and by defeating those bosses, we can push back the brine and give ourselves more time to explore and move forward. But even completing all of these tasks, we will eventually see that we can only rest so many times, and we will be sort of forced to fight the final boss near the end. If you don't deal with these pillars of light, the area of the map could be consumed by the encroaching fog. Even if you slow it down, you still end up being tasked with saving the civilians of the major settlements you visited by helping them migrate to a new, safe location that we will talk about shortly. There is no day and night cycle here. The world is forever a hostile place with the most difficult enemies in the game. Even chimeras have a new alternate form to fight against. Luckily, we are close to the Seafloor Shrine, and in the middle of the red beams of light is a blue one. If we make our way to the shrine, we can run into Rotheus, who is surprised to see that you were able to do what he could not. To break the cycle and stop the world from being witnessed. To defeat fate. This is where Rotheus informs us more about his past, but was soon deemed the Mad Sovereign because he killed indiscriminately in an attempt to defeat the agents of the Watching One, as he puts it. Rotheus will use his power as the Seneschal to will all of the previous Arisen to your side, to look over the Seafloor Shrine. These individuals seem to only show up if you helped or interacted with them in some capacity. I don't remember seeing the Warfarer guy in the shrine on my second playthrough as an example. They explain that this is a safe haven from the brine, at least for now, and that we could use it as a safe location to bring the rest of the land to and keep them safe, creating a base of operations. And that's what happens. You get to watch this shrine's community grow as time passes. By saving various locations and progressing time through sleeping, you will see more and more refugees show up. Shops get opened, tents appear, people begin to live here over time. It's engaging to watch the progress and reward of your actions. Additionally, the Dragonforge now offers some new gear for you to purchase using Worm's Life Crystals, a currency collected from the dragons you fight. We needed 15 of these to fix the Godsbane originally, but you are going to be collecting much more within the Unmoored world. You can use these to buy more powerful equipment or to Dragonforge your gear. And what's even weirder, while not one-to-one, the ruins of this location seem to resemble the city of Gran Soren from the first game. You have the two main shops in the city center, and you can find the pawn guild that would lead to the Everfall, which I imagine lines up with where we found Rotheus, suggesting that an Everfall does exist in this world. So is this the same world as the original game, but just at a different point in time? Or is this the clashing of two different worlds a la something like Dark Souls? Personally, I assumed this was nothing other than an Easter egg. However, everything is supposed to be intentional, so it has to be tied to the lore in some way, right? It's a nice callback at the very least, and as you progress through the end game, it feels like you are slowly becoming the individual that founded the city of Gran Soren by bringing all these people together. So that's the main goal of the end game. Save as many people as you can, defeat the bosses found under the Pillars of Light, and then move on to the finale, all while fighting powerful enemies and collecting new loot/gear. There is some powerful equipment to be found, so if you have been upset with that aspect of exploration so far, now is your opportunity to go out and find as much as possible. Try not to feel stressed out. I understand the idea of being on some sort of timer can make you feel rushed, and it did for me as well on my first playthrough, but really it's not that bad, and you realize as much on your second playthrough at the very least. The first time you play, you should feel a semblance of danger, of looming destruction. That's the point. It's not meant to feel comfortable, it's meant to feel like you need to save the world. Luckily for us, a bunch of static port crystals begin to appear in important locations. So even if you didn't collect a lot of port crystals in your main playthrough, you will still have an easier time getting around. Plus, fairy stones start to drop like candy here, so I recommend stocking up before your second playthrough. All of this to say, you are on some form of timer, but you don't have to worry about it too much. Utilize wake stones and all heals and try to sleep as little as possible. You'll be fine even if you do sleep, as long as you focus on getting rid of those red beams of light first. We have one issue to deal with first. Our pawn seems to be missing. We can visit Phases back at his lab in Battahl to find out we've been gone for about a month, and our pawn was found unconscious for the entirety of the time we were missing. This is implied to be when they became infected with Dragonsplague. In fact, while I don't know if this is true, I theorize that every pawn who enters the Unmoored world for the first time in a playthrough probably registers with the plague in the rift, meaning the spread of the plague may have started when the first person playing the game made it here. So Patient Zero is probably some reviewer out there who speedran through the game. We can head to Battahl and find Phases with our pawn. He's trying to research what is going on in the world currently and is, for all intents and purposes, our ally now. With our arrival, our pawn wakes up and we can start the endgame proper. Here's how it works. Major areas generally have two tasks to complete: the beam of light and talking to the leaders of those areas to convince them to head to the seafloor shrine. The bad news is that you will not be able to fully save everyone if you have not completed specific side quests in the main game. That's not a bad thing though. That has been the design of Dragon's Dogma from day one, and you should expect it by now. You miss out on things if you don't look for them. I don't know how many areas are like this, but at the very least, the elves won't leave unless you complete the quest that saves their sacred tree. Melv is destroyed by this point, so if you didn't help the villagers or Ulrika, I imagine they would all be dead moving forward as well. So your lack of progress and exploration in the main game can have major consequences in the end game, especially if you are trying to get all of the achievements, but that's the name of the game, baby. You aren't supposed to have a perfect playthrough, and this is the perfect example of showing that. The entire concept of the Unmoored world is about making you feel bad and trying to kick your ass for destroying the cycle, and you are supposed to feel punished for that. You are supposed to question if you are currently in the bad ending and if what you did was justified. It's brilliant. Give them the bad ending and let them continue playing the game. Watch them struggle, see if they can overcome it. Even the concept of the red beams of light can be different depending on how you handled things in the main game, specifically surrounding Talos. Remember all the ways his fight could end? He could disappear completely, lose an arm, or be stopped in place without any damage. Well, that will affect how many bosses you have to fight in the end game. One boss is a special event where you need to work with phases to destroy an evil vase, and yeah, I know that sounds weird. Another is a fight against an actual worm, and the third is a fight against a new type of brine dragon. But the worm and potentially the dragon can have repeat fights in specific locations if you don't have Talos available to you. When approaching Talos in the Unmoored world, your pawn will float up to his eye and enter inside, suggesting to me that the pawn has some sort of connection to the brine and is now able to control the giant to fight against the end times. If Talos is missing an arm, he'll just fight a worm, but if he has both arms, the cutscene is extended by having a battle against a dragon first, and then following that up with the worm after. So you get to watch two unique battles if you manage to prevent Talos from losing any limbs, just as a little reward for your efforts, and chances are some of you won't even see these cutscenes depending on how things play out. Or if you even walked up to Talos in the Unmoored world to begin with. There is a quest for Talos, but I never got it to trigger. Luckily, walking up to him starts the quest anyway, so you don't have to miss out if you didn't start in Battahl. At least, I assume that's where you start it. I still don't know how to actually do it. I don't have much to say on the battles themselves. The vase is arguably the more interesting of the fights, but only due to it not really being a fight at all. It's more of an adventure with phases as you fight through hordes of possessed enemies so you can reach the vase and destroy it. The worm and dragon fights are essentially the same as they cannot be damaged by typical means, and you instead have to destroy weak points similar to a golem. It's not bad, but it's not amazing either. Nothing to really wow you, so you may be thinking there's some big boss battle payoff at the end to really get you going, and how wrong you are, buddy. How wrong you are. In a way, the endgame is most interesting in how it is an epilogue for many of the storylines you took part in, which is a blessing since most of them felt as though they fell off the map before they could be truly finished. The Elven Tree is an example of something that felt like it earned a conclusion. Now we need to move them to the shrine, but the leader of the community isn't willing to go unless we find a place to plant a sprout of the Arbor Heart. Luckily, the tree is no longer dying, so we can get a sprout and bring it to the shrine to plant, convincing the community to come on over. On the other side of things, you have Vermund, where Sven seems to now be in charge. I don't know if you can prevent him from getting people to migrate because he seemed particularly gung-ho about the idea. I did notice that you get an extended conversation between him and his mother if you completed all of his side quests, though. That helps him explain to his mother that he understands what she did was for his benefit, that he wishes they had communicated better to prevent this situation from arising. And in this way, you seem to be able to save the both of them, even though you may want to throw the queen off a cliff at this point. A lot of content that felt like it had no conclusion keeps some semblance of that here, so I'm not surprised many people thought the game's storyline just fell off into nothingness, because that's essentially what happens. If there's one thing this series is great at, it's lore. Having a cohesive storyline from start to finish, not so much. One of the more rewarding aspects of the game is all of the new content available to you. Many of the shops will still be available once they reach the Seafloor Shrine, and they will be carrying new, powerful, and expensive gear that you can purchase and make use of. Luckily, there are several static, large monster encounters that can drop some of these pieces for you to save you some money. Plus, you also have the Dragonforge gear that can be purchased with Worm's Life crystals. Some of the best gear seems to come from chests that were originally under bodies of water though, so it pays off to do your due diligence and explore these new locations as much as possible. I enjoy the Unmoored world. I think it's a refreshing experience and you really do not care about the timer once you have a better grasp on the rules of the endgame. I think the new creatures, materials, and equipment to fight and interact with are much more interesting to run into within the world itself than one of the repeating halls of the Everfall. The one issue I do have is that many of these creatures, if not all of them, are just higher tier reskins of things you've already fought. A new chimera, a new dragon. I think the only truly new enemy is the worm creature that appears out of the red light beam. The issue comes when you finally finish all of the red beams and a final one appears in the seafloor shrine, signifying the end of the game. It's probably one of the more disappointing aspects of the game for people, and I understand why. I can understand why the original dragon fight with Grigori or whoever it is was so simplistic and short. If you have to repeat it for whatever reason to figure out how to get to the true ending or to get some crystals, a long fight could feel annoying to go through multiple times. So then you'd expect there to be a better fight for the true finale, but that isn't the case. Instead, what we get is a giant set piece. As we approach the light, a new dragon, similar to Grigori but tainted by the brine, comes out of the sky. This seems to be the Pathfinder changed in the new world in an attempt to get us to rectify the cycle. If there is no dragon, they become the dragon. As we watch this, our pawn succumbs to the plague and transforms into a dragon enshrouded by darkness, and then carries us up into the sky so we can land on top of the Watcher and begin the finale. There's no fight here. Instead, we just get a huge exposition dump, which, while great in terms of lore, is unsatisfying from a gameplay perspective. As we climb the new dragon, it tells us how countless worlds were created, but all seem to fall to oblivion after time, as if time kills all things, similar to the heat death that awaits our own real universe. Apparently, the Great Will, a godly being, tired of this and created the cycle as a means of preventing this inevitable doom. If the path of the world is set to repeat, it should never meet its end, meaning these worlds can continue existing. Oblivion was transformed by the Great Will into the dragon and given a purpose: to create destruction and to fight against the Arisen. The Arisen would then defeat the dragon or fail, and the cycle would repeat, meaning the end of the world was permanently locked away as long as everyone played their role. The dragon of this world seemed to tire of this and wished to push the Arisen to break the cycle, hence why Talos seemed to be summoned as a means of stopping him. Everyone in the world is a character in a story, and every good story has roles for their characters, no matter how big or small. Everyone has a purpose, and the purpose of the Arisen is to fight the dragon. If anyone should not take part in their duty, their role, the world would unravel. The localization analysis I mentioned previously seems to interpret the story slightly differently, however. It suggests that the Great Will was born out of the constant oblivion, and the role of the Great Will became that of the dragon. And it is through the dragon that the world is protected from nothingness, and it is the cycle of the dragon and the Arisen that constructs the world and is the dragon's dogma. The analysis suggests that there is a crucial misunderstanding between the ending dialogue in English and Japanese, but that doesn't seem to be the case for me. Rather, the biggest difference is the role of the will, whether it be the personification of the dragon or its creator. It makes more sense to me to think of the Great Will as the creator of the cycle for countless worlds that it now watches over. And the will of an individual is directly tied to that of the Great Will, explaining why the concept of will is so valuable within the world of Dragon's Dogma. The analysis goes more in depth in several other aspects as well, such as the English version's inability to mention the seneschal, so check the link in the description and come up with your own theories. As the monologue continues, you'll work your way up to the chest of the dragon and eventually be knocked off to begin plummeting through the sky. Your pawn, now a dragon, will attack the heart of the Watcher and break it open, explaining how your strong will has bestowed a will into the pawn itself. If you've played the original game, you already knew this was the case. Pawns gain wills and humanity as they live. They even begin to look like they're arisen over time. The really cool thing about this scene is that if your pawn has full affinity, they will change back into their humanoid form for some extended dialogue before the scene plays off like normal while they get swatted away by the dragon. This is the moment where you attempt to truly break yourself free from the cycle, and if not the cycle, the concept of oblivion entirely. The dragon seems to have been born of the brine. The Pathfinder and the brine seem interconnected in many ways. With the destruction of the world at hand, you take the God's Bane and plunge it into the heart of the dragon, killing the Pathfinder and preventing them from being able to witness the world any longer, and seemingly defeating the brine in the process as well. This is implied since we later see the fisherman taking a boat out into the ocean, suggesting that the water is now safe to traverse. As we plunge the God's Bane into the dragon, the Pathfinder tells us that oblivion fades and that the end of this tale has been unwritten, suggesting that we have defeated the core or the source of what has been threatening our world. By doing so, we have defeated the brine, and with the brine gone, the world can return to its true state, allowing the individuals within to continue living, potentially with no more dragons or destruction looming over them. The Pathfinder tells you that a new tale is set to unfold, but that they will not be there to watch it, that their role has come to an end. The world no longer needs a witness to watch over it because it's been freed from the shackles of oblivion, and what better description for the brine than shackles? As the screen fades and we come to the true final credit sequence, you will receive a series of cutscenes based on which side quests you managed to complete. If you saved Vernworth, if you helped Wilhelmina and Ulrika, etc. Many will have small scenes showing what they are doing now or showing that they are well, that they managed to survive in this new world that was rebuilt after the destruction of the brine, and at the end, this is when we see the fishermen take off into the ocean, ending the story of Dragon's Dogma 2. And what a story it manages to be at the end. If this were a DLC for the original, it would have added so much context to the experience. Instead, it's left a bit confusing for players who have come into the series fresh, as there is so much that isn't explained for them. The Will of Pawns isn't fully explored, the Seneschal isn't mentioned in the English localization, and the concept of Grand Sorin being the seafloor shrine never gets explored further. You go from dealing with the Queen 1 minute to learning about the God of the Universe, the Great Will. It's abrupt, and there's a sense of whiplash. People are theorizing that the game is once again unfinished. Really, I think it's as finished as Itsuno wanted the game to be, but only because it is seen as a companion piece to the original. Standing on its own, it's impossible to get the full value out of the storyline, and that's a crime because it's been 12 years and there are going to be so many people that haven't played the first game. So it's a bit of a bittersweet ending, and an obtuse one at that. Despite everything we have done, there is no concrete answer on whether or not we have truly ended the cycle. Like when we used the God's Bane on our Seneschal in the first game, the world seems reset in a way, but there are no answers for us to know what state it is in currently, if it's truly safe, if Oblivion is truly gone, and many assume that some of these questions will be explored in potential DLC in the future. I'm not so sure, but we can always hope. A friend of mine and Twitch streamer Breebun sent me a transcription found on Reddit of the game's ending credits song that I'll also have in the description of this video. It talks of a white canvas within a world full of turmoil and strife, as if a new world has been created for everyone, but it still holds challenges for them to overcome. Most interesting, it mentions a stage set for greatness, with a cast ready to fulfill their roles, but with no witness to observe it. Everyone is ready to move on with their lives freely, and there is no longer the Pathfinder to watch them, and to make sure fate is kept in check. Everyone is in a play, and that can sound a bit ominous when we start talking about New Game Plus. The overall experience leading up to this point is an amazing one. As a companion piece to the original, it's improved in many ways, faltered in others, and the story adds to the experience. But by itself, I'm not surprised many were unhappy with how the story progressed to this point, only to get thrown a bunch of lore at the very end, and it's disappointing that the game didn't take into consideration that more lore building would be necessary to get everyone caught up. So believe it or not, but the game isn't over necessarily. The New Game Plus aspect of Dragon's Dogma 2 is a little disappointing because there's no added challenge. You are stronger and the enemies get weaker and weaker as you level up. There has yet to be a hard mode to play through, so you can't make use of your new power without feeling as though you are overpowered, and that can feel boring. There is at least one change though. The Dragon Forged offers a few new services in New Game Plus. By spending Worm's Life crystals, you can gain boons such as EXP and discipline point bonuses. You can also choose a single skill to, I believe, half the stamina cost on, making certain skills more viable to use, especially ones that use stamina over time. You also gain the ability to upgrade a single vocation, but you can swap these vocations and skill selections around as you go. The vocation upgrade seems to give you more stats as you level up, suggesting that the leveling system from the first game may be intact, but this doesn't seem to be the case for a major reason. The vocation you are on does seem to affect the stats you get on a level up, but all of your stats seem to have a hard cap that you'll reach around level 200. So this bonus just helps you reach that cap faster, but there's no real min-maxing like before because it's possible to cap every stat in the game by just leveling up normally. Still cool to have new additions to the game to make a second playthrough more refreshing. I just wish there was more. Now there's one other aspect of New Game Plus that is confusing. Some people think it's a bug, others think it has a deeper meaning. I have yet to experience this myself, but within cutscenes, typical NPCs have been seen with red glowing eyes, similar to pawns succumbing to the Dragonsplague. I've seen a few theories on why this happens. Some people suggest it's a bug. Others think it's because those characters appeared in front of the Pathfinder during the scene where we sank into the brine. Some even believe it's alluding to the idea that these NPCs are pawns. My personal belief or hope is that this is an intentional mechanic and means something. Maybe foreshadowing for future content or something tied to a secret mechanic. Who knows? If the Pathfinder could make doppelgangers with red glowing eyes, who's to say we aren't simply in a made-up world that was designed to keep us complacent and repeating the same cycle over and over again? The tell to this could be that these fake versions of characters we know now have red glowing eyes. It's a mystery at the moment, and one I am heavily invested in learning more about.
To me now, Arisen. I am no longer a mere vessel. Your great will has imbued me with a lesser will of my own. Will is power. 'Tis the means to shape the world as one desires. Master!
Oblivion fades. This tale's end has been unwritten. My heart, it aches.
Dragon's Dogma 2 is a flawed experience, one that seems like it hasn't learned from its past, and it's understandable that would frustrate people who have been waiting so long for the sequel. Hell, it frustrated me as well, and I am a die-hard fan of the series. The way they gutted aspects of certain vocations to streamline them led to a better feel when playing them, but also removed part of the allure and depth. Is that a worthwhile trade? A give and take? I'm not sure. I definitely didn't feel as though I was missing different aspects of Mage or Sorcerer while playing them, but I rarely if ever focus on those vocations. I definitely felt like I missed Strider though, and everything I was able to do with that class. Using my daggers, switching to my bow, double jumping through the city. Even scaling the buildings within the cities feels lesser in comparison to the first game, where Grand Soren felt incredibly dense and often presented you with opportunities to make your way onto the countless rooftops. Vernworth felt more spaced out, and the only time I ever thought of scaling something was when I was looking for a Seeker's Token, or when my pawns continued to shout about ladders that they had found in some alleyway. There's a lot here where, when looking back on it in hindsight, you start to see what is missing, or what wasn't built upon from the first game. It can leave the finished product feeling hollow for people that played the original, or confusing / lackluster for those that haven't. Personally though, when I spent my time playing through the game, rarely was I feeling this way in the moment. When I was exploring Vernworth, I was too busy taking in all of the quests and features that were there to care about climbing the rooftops, which you still can do, although limited. When I was playing fighter and fighting hordes of goblins, I wasn't thinking about how I was down 3 skills. When I was thief, I was too busy shredding through enemies to think about needing a bow and arrow. There's so much good constantly being thrown at you in the game that the downsides can only be seen in hindsight for me. The biggest issue for me was how the story was handled, how it seemed to drop off the map once we reached Battahl, the handling of lore and how it was conveyed to the player, the lack of a real final boss encounter instead of a set piece we walk across. There's many issues here, and there's many issues with the design in general, but there's still plenty that I see and am impressed with that keeps me wanting to play. Every day I get a message from someone informing me of something new. There's places I haven't explored, features I haven't seen, ways to deal with bosses that I would never have thought of. There's a reason to play this game again and again, so I can continue to break it down and see everything there is to see. And the combat is satisfying enough that, while incredibly dense with enemies, I rarely feel tired of working my way through the lands of Vermund or Battahl. And what lore there was incredibly interesting to me. I believe anyone that was interested in the lore of the first game would be doing themselves a disservice to miss out on experiencing the continuation of that here. Despite its flaws, Dragon's Dogma 2 managed to offer me much of what the original did as well. Combat that I rarely see in games these days, and a sense of wonder at every turn. Something to talk to my friends about for days because there's so many interesting topics to cover. Dragon's Dogma is by no means a perfect experience, but it is one of the greatest experiences of its time, and I can't recommend playing it enough. Do yourself a favor and go play this game. Better yet, play the original first and then play this one. Dark Arisen is like $5 on sale, guys. Come on. Like I said in my original retrospective, Dragon's Dogma is one of the most unique experiences out there for its time. It's a rare thing to have a game so mechanically unique and intensive while producing a storyline so full of existential curiosity. A game that looks at every little mechanic and tries to make it impactful. I hope you enjoy your time with this game. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Hey, thanks so much for watching the video and making it to the Patreon section. You should see a list of all of the patrons here. It's usually here. I'm going to go ahead and shout out the G-Rank patrons now. If you want to support me on Patreon and have your name in the video or have me shout you out, feel free to do that and find the link in the description. Shout out to Jessica, Gloomerous, Jordan Painter, Alid, Omar Parker, Tron, Brendan Hesse, Wooly, Ralcar, Prime XD, Ashtray, Mo Al-Kasemi, Captain Zeba, Cyberworm, Jonathan, Strange Lee, Lude Hafumi, Rosaleo, and Mr. Janky. Thank you guys so much for all of the support throughout all of the videos, and I hope to see you in the next one.